It all began when a disfigured servant and the young daughter of a noble family secretly fell in love. Though they were only children, they cherished every moment they had together. But their happiness was short-lived. The girl's family soon discovered their forbidden love and immediately cast the servant out of the palace. Where he worked, they abandoned the poor boy in a freezing forest during deadly cold weather. With no money to buy even a bite of food to survive and no weapon to defend himself, the boy was completely helpless. That day marked the final time the girl ever saw him in their last moments together before being torn apart. The boy made a solemn promise. He vowed that one day he would return strong and wealthy enough to be worthy of her, and when that day came, he would ask for her hand in marriage. It was the only thing that could soothe the girl's tears, giving her hope that they might meet again someday. But things didn't unfold as they had wished. 15 years passed. The boy had survived that terrible day, but instead of becoming someone noble and admirable, he turned into the most feared and hated villain across the entire continent. The rumors about him grew so horrifying that people began calling him the demon Sword of Chaos. Simply hearing his name was enough to make people tremble in fear. Or worse, meeting him in person was something no one dared to imagine. On the other hand, the girl had taken a much different path. She grew into a beacon of justice and hope, known throughout the land as the Star of Righteousness and the Lunar Sword. She wasn't just one of the kingdom's most skilled warriors. Her breathtaking beauty was on a different level altogether. Her looks were so enchanting that anyone who saw her face and body instantly fell in love. Even after 15 years, she remained devoted to that same boy from her childhood. She had no idea if he was even alive, but she hadn't forgotten his promise. That was the very reason she never allowed any other man to come close to her. The scene shifted to the present day. In a bustling inn, the place was packed with people happily chatting about their achievements and adventures. In one corner, a young man sat quietly, observing the lively crowd and wondering if this little inn was truly the famous hub for merchants and travelers he'd heard about. The young man, Jo Yoon, was a warrior with a spear he kept carefully wrapped. He was feeling pretty good, relieved to have made it to this place safely, and even happier because the locals treated him so kindly. Either out of genuine kindness or perhaps because they thought he was some skilled fighter. A group of adventurers invited Jo Yoon to join their guild and work with them, but Jo Yoon politely declined. He explained that he wasn't here for work, but for a personal mission, more like a dream to chase and a promise he absolutely had to keep. That was his priority, and nothing would stop him. Actually, no one wanted to stop him. However, a bald man in the group gave him a serious warning. He told Jo Yoon to be really careful while moving around the area. Naturally, Jo Yoon was curious and asked what he meant by that dot with a creepy look on his face. The man explained there was a dangerous monster lurking near the village, a cruel, bloodthirsty person who hunted martial artists and carried their severed heads around to terrify others. Jo Yoon looked like he was impressed by the horror story, but the truth was, he wasn't unfamiliar with it at all. Sipping his tea calmly, he acted as if this was exactly why he was there. In the middle of their conversation, someone walked into the inn, instantly grabbing everyone's attention. And sure enough, it was the very man they had just been talking about, the monstrous, wild-looking figure with his infamous bloody bag. He dropped the bag onto the floor with a heavy thud and began walking forward. His presence alone was enough to send chills through the room, freezing everyone in their seats, everyone except Jo Yoon. That is, either he didn't know him or didn't care who he was. The others were terrified, only daring to whisper among themselves, wondering if this was really that monster the rumors spoke of. With an irritated look, the man barked at the attendant to call the innkeeper immediately, but the attendant nervously explained that the innkeeper was out running an errand and offered to help with whatever the man needed in the meantime. Trying to be polite, the attendant reached for what he assumed was the man's luggage, intending to carry it to a quiet room until the innkeeper returned. As soon as the attendant looked at the bag, he froze, realizing it wasn't at all what he had expected. Still, he decided to carry it, but before he could do anything, the man grabbed his hand, stopping him in his tracks. The room fell silent. Everyone watched in terror, thinking this might be the end for the poor attendant. With another chilling side glare, the monstrous man declared loudly that the bag contained his prey, and no one but him had the right to touch it. The attendant freaked out, trembling uncontrollably, and the only thing he could do was stammer out an apology for disrespecting him. This unsettling scene sparked murmurs among the crowd, with people whispering that this man was every bit as cruel as the rumors claimed. But before he could do anything, the bag suddenly started to move, and the noise immediately caught the man's attention. He turned toward it, his expression dark and menacing. With a voice that sent shivers down everyone's spine, he muttered an apology to his prey, saying he was sorry for letting it suffer, and that he would now finish what he had started. Just as his hand reached for the bag, someone sprang into action, stopping him in his tracks. That someone was none other than Jo Yoon. He didn't just dare to stop the monstrous man, he stood tall and fearlessly challenged him to an honor duel. The room went silent in utter disbelief. No one, not even the bald man from earlier, had expected this. Everyone was questioning whether Jo Yoon had lost his mind or had suddenly gone crazy. The monstrous man, with the new wound on his face, turned to Jo Yoon, his lips curling into a mocking grin. His tone dripped with disdain as he sneered. "You against me?" Jo Yoon, still brimming with confidence, boldly declared that he was here to confront the greatest enemy of the martial world, the one responsible for the suffering of every single person in the area. And of course, he was talking about this guy and not anyone else. He added that this was the dream and the oath that had driven him to come all this way. Hearing what sounded like a childish speech, the ugly, wild-looking man smirked before bursting into laughter loud enough to echo for miles. Letting out a heavy sigh, the man began to explain that not only Jo Yoon, but everyone else had misunderstood everything about him. However, before he could even finish his sentence, Jo Yoon cut him off, mocking him outright. It was clear Jo Yoon believed the man was just trying to make excuses to avoid a fight. With a loud clang, Jo Yoon slammed his spear into the ground, once again declaring that he had come all this way for one reason alone, to find and fight him. He made it clear that no excuses would be accepted. Seeing how determined Jo Yoon was, the monstrous man gave him a glance, his expression unreadable, and said, "If that's the case, I accept your challenge, but I need to prepare first." Jo Yoon froze for a moment, shocked by what he had just heard, narrowing his eyes. He immediately jumped to the conclusion that his opponent was trying to escape. But before he could press the matter, the crowd erupted, yelling at him as if he had lost his mind. They all insisted that the infamous monster standing before them wasn't the type to run from a fight. In their eyes, a ruthless man like that one, who didn't care whether his opponents were rogue or righteous, would never avoid a challenge, especially not from someone like Jo Yoon. The crowd tried to stop the determined boy, voicing their concerns and practically begging him to reconsider to them. But Jo Yoon wouldn't back down. He had sworn an oath, and no amount of fear or warning could shake his resolve. He dreamed of becoming the greatest, and to do that, he needed to defeat the most feared man in the martial world. Eventually, Jo Yoon agreed to give his opponent a short time to prepare, and the monster disappeared into a nearby room. At first, it seemed like he had gone to ready himself for the upcoming duel, but that wasn't the case. As it turns out, the monstrous, cruel-looking figure was actually Yu, the servant boy who had survived all this time. Strangely, he wasn't preparing to fight at all. In reality, he was desperately trying to buy time and find a way to escape. He hadn't come to this place to cause trouble. He had only come to sell his prey, which was just a small boar he had barely managed to hunt. There was no severed martial artist head, no gruesome trophies, just an unfortunate misunderstanding that had spiraled out of control. You never got the chance to clear up the rumors that labeled him the most dangerous villain of the martial world. The truth was much sadder. He couldn't even use his inner power for a martial artist. That was devastating. He knew better than anyone that he was nothing more than a third-rate warrior. Someone with the equivalent of errant potential was why people kept judging him based on looks alone. Panicking, you scrambled to find a way out of the duel. He couldn't believe he was being forced to fight just because he had kindly stopped the inn's attendant from touching his dirty bag. That one act of caution had escalated into a life-threatening misunderstanding. He didn't want to die, especially not in a meaningless fight with a guy like Jo Yoon. He'd had dreams and promises to keep, and fate with its strange sense of timing had something else in store. At that very moment, the girl you had been thinking about accidentally entered the same village. The commotion Jo Yoon had caused, shouting for the demon sword of chaos, had drawn her attention. She'd also heard the rumors and decided to investigate the source of the fuss. As soon as she arrived, she gently tapped Jo Yoon on the neck. When he turned to see who it was, his eyes widened in shock and disbelief. She removed her hat, revealing her face, and asked if he was the one planning to fight the so-called demon sword of chaos. Her striking red eyes, perfectly paired with her pink and silver hair, and of course her prominent figure, made Jo Yoon's heart skip a beat. He blushed just like the others watching nearby. Before anything else could happen, another man recognized the girl and exclaimed that she was the Lunar Sword, the direct disciple of the former greatest martial artist who had Jo Yoon assumed she had come for the same reason. He had to take down the biggest threat in the martial world. Determined not to let the opportunity slip away, he boldly declared that he wanted to team up with her in his mind, fighting side by side with her. And defeating you would not only be an honor, but also a chance to gain fame and recognition. Sua, on the other hand, finally understood the situation and couldn't have been happier. The duel and Jo Yoon meant nothing to her. What mattered was that she had finally found the person she'd been searching for, her lover, after 15 long years. She couldn't wait another moment to see him again. Her excitement confused Jo Yoon, who misread her reaction. He thought she was impressed by his courage and desired to defeat the demon sword. The misunderstanding made him feel like he had been chosen by fate, perhaps even as her romantic partner. He began daydreaming, suggesting once again that they form a strong alliance after the duel and travel the world together. Meanwhile, inside the inn, chaos was growing for Yu. He was still trying to find a way to avoid the fight, completely unaware of what was happening outside. He reasoned that reporting the situation to the authorities was the most sensible option, especially since dueling was strictly forbidden by law. He decided that as a responsible citizen, that was his best move. But just as he made up his mind, the inn's wooden wall suddenly burst apart, slashed open by sword. Before someone made a dramatic entrance, the terrified boy jumped into a corner, trembling and trying to shield himself. And of course it was Jo Yoon. The sight of him made Yu scream in absolute panic, convinced his life was about to end before he even got the chance to marry Sua. Crawling backward, Yu tried frantically to delay the inevitable. He begged for more time, claimed he wasn't ready, was a private room Jo Yoon had no right to enter. Then unexpectedly, a voice cut through his rambling. Sua had entered the room and calmly announced that she had finally found Yu. The boy was speechless, whether from seeing the love of his life again or realizing she was the one who had smashed through the wall moments earlier. Everything became clear in an instant. It wasn't Jo Yoon who had broken the wall. It was Sua, using his unconscious body as a battering ram. She had made a point to show what happened to anyone who disrespected the Lunar Sword's beloved. Tossing Jo Yoon's limp body to the ground, Sua turned to Yu and began to approach him. She proudly declared that she had become one of the strongest martial artists on the continent and now had more than enough money to start a perfect life for both of them. And the money wasn't inherited. She had earned every coin herself. She stepped closer, gazing into the eyes of the one she loved, the boy the world called the demon sword of chaos, but neither his infamous title nor his pitiful condition changed the way she felt. Without hesitation, Sua looked him in the eyes and asked him to marry her. Sua boldly declared that nothing and no one could stop their marriage now. Contrary to what outsiders might have expected, a dramatic, explosive clash between the greatest hero, the Lunar Sword, and the most feared villain, the Devil's Sword. The atmosphere inside the resting room was surprisingly calm. The clueless one didn't recognize Sua. Not even when reminded of their past promise, he simply pointed toward the door behind him, suggesting that the demon's sword of chaos had just left the room. But with his face plastered across wanted posters, he quickly realized such a pathetic excuse wouldn't work. When she didn't respond, he decided to use the opportunity to escape, mumbling apologies and mentioning some sudden urgent errand. He awkwardly began heading toward the exit. Before he could leave, Sua gently took his hand, stopping him. You thought it might be the end for him, but instead of harming him, she did something unexpected. She removed his glove and placed his hand softly against her cheek. The warmth of her skin triggered a rush of memories. It was how he used to show affection, and though she was the one guiding the gesture, it still made her blush, just like she did long ago. She quietly asked him to say her name again. Slowly, his memory stirred. He looked at her and hesitantly asked if she was Lady Sua. The realization hit him like lightning. All the memories of their secret love, of being a starving servant boy sold to her noble family, treated with compassion and even affection by its youngest daughter, rushed back. Before he could linger too long in the past, reality returned. There she was, still close to him. No longer a young girl, but a grown woman, more beautiful than anyone he had ever known. Yet despite recognizing her, you felt deeply uneasy sitting that close. Sua broke the silence by asking why he hadn't touched his tea. Startled, he thanked her and awkwardly said he drank it, tacking on my lady. Out of habit, that formality darkened her expression. She reminded him of the promise they'd made. He wasn't to call her that anymore. You, nervous and unsure, tried calling her Lady Sua instead, but it still felt distant. Finally blushing and too shy to look her in the eye, he softly spoke her name and admitted he was happy to see her again. That single sentence lit up her face, transforming her into the cheerful girl from his memories. Her joy was evident. She smiled and replied that she was even happier to see him. The moment was overwhelming. Yu's thoughts began to wander as he tried to suppress wild imaginings. To distract himself, he pointed at her sword and asked whether she had truly become a martial artist. She confirmed it proudly. She had worked relentlessly to reach her current level, all for the sake of the one she loved. Though Yu didn't respond, as if he remembered the promise, the memory of him shouting his vow to grow strong and wealthy enough to marry her stayed burned in Sua's heart. Eventually, it dawned on Yu what she had meant. His jaw dropping in shock, Sua meanwhile assumed he had remembered their promise all along and was only surprised that she had remembered too. She recounted how she tracked him down, spurred by rumors of the demon's sword of chaos. That name made Yu visibly flinch, expecting questions or teasing. But Sua didn't mention it directly. Instead, she brought up the rumors surrounding the demon's sword, harassing women, skipping meal payments. Oddly enough, all of it lined up with the behavior Yu used to display as a mischievous servant. Sua then took his grimy hand in hers and firmly declared that she didn't care about how the world saw him, whether he was cruel, hated, or a bit of a pervert. It meant nothing to her. She still loved him exactly as he was. There was only one thing: she wanted to marry him and start a family together. Unlike Sua, who seemed eager to bang our MC, marry him and start a family as soon as possible, Yu wasn't on board. He wasn't thinking about marriage at all. In fact, he was scrambling for a believable excuse to get out of it. He quickly claimed that an enormous debt stood between them, tying him down. And for once, this excuse wasn't entirely made up. In the past, he had tried countless times to become stronger, paying martial arts masters for lessons, only to be kicked out after they deemed his potential worthless. Left broke and desperate, someone had once appeared, offering him money in exchange for a future favor. That person was Han, a woman from the Eternal Bureau Guild. The scene shifted there now, revealing her dressed boldly without even lingerie and introducing herself as one of the guild's leaders. Han was the mysterious benefactor who had given you the money he needed. Sua had come all the way here after learning about her intending to confront the source of Yu's burden. Based only on Yu's vague explanation, Sua immediately accused Han of exploiting men by paying their debts and then controlling them. Han, genuinely confused, didn't understand why she was being accused. The truth was more awkward. She was essentially Yu's sugar mommy, supporting him in return for borrowing his infamous title. Yu meanwhile regretted ever involving Han in his mess. She had been the only person who didn't hate him or judge him. She'd paid his debt and kept him alive with no real demands. Still, Yu believed Sua had the wrong idea, that she thought he had become strong and successful as promised. He feared what would happen if the truth came out after they were married, imagining the consequences. Beatings, interrogations, disappointment pushed him to make the debt excuse. In desperation, he dragged Han into the mess. She glanced at his dumb, pleading face and instantly understood what he wanted. With her sharp intuition, she guessed that Yu hoped she'd exaggerate the debt to scare Sua off. Sua demanded to know the exact amount he owed. Han paused, considering how high she could go. Finally, with complete confidence, she declared that to clear Yu's debt, Sua would need to pay 10,000 gold coins. It was the exact ridiculous figure you had hoped. She'd say he smiled, believing there was no way Sua could produce such a sum, especially for someone like him. He even suggested they all go home and think things through a little longer. To everyone's shock, Sua suddenly pulled out a massive bag of gold so large it defied explanation. It might as well have come out of thin air. The bag was bursting with enough gold to clear the entire debt. Both Yu and Han stood frozen, eyes wide, unable to believe what they were seeing. Yu's expression turned visibly disappointed. Sua noticed but misread his reaction. She thought he was ashamed that she was paying his debt. Gently, she reassured him. Since they were going to be married, she said there would be no more his or hers. Everything would be shared. To make it worse, she added that nothing spent on him was ever wasted. Her kind words struck Yu like an arrow to the heart. He felt exposed, unworthy of her love, and unable to run anymore. Meanwhile, Han stared at the mountain of gold in stunned silence, realizing it far exceeded what she'd asked for. She looked at Yu and saw a man being dragged unwillingly into marriage. With a new idea forming, Han decided it was time to take things a step further, one that might finally make Sua reconsider. Han slowly rose to her feet, a mischievous glint flashing in her eyes. Suddenly, she shouted for them to wait. Sua and Yu were just about to leave, but Sua turned at the sound of Han's voice, half expecting her to ask for more money. However, this wasn't about money at all. Han stepped toward Yu and, without warning, wrapped her arms tightly around him. It seemed she was either pretending or perhaps finally revealing the truth about their relationship. Stunned by the bold move Han had made, Sua's eyes widened in disbelief as she witnessed the scene. Ignoring Sua for the moment, Han leaned in and whispered to Yu that he shouldn't panic and she would handle this girl for him. But things didn't unfold the way Han had hoped. Sua wasn't going to let the situation slide. Her response was swift and fierce. A glowing sword appeared in her hand, and wild lightning crackled around her body. She fixed her glare on Han, her voice sharp and commanding as she demanded Han step away from Yu or be forced to. In that moment, both Han and Yu realized how serious things had become. They had only two options: separate peacefully or face Sua's wrath. As Sua moved forward, Han began to regret her actions, fearing she might have taken things too far. Meanwhile, Yu desperately tried to de-escalate it, explaining that it was all just a misunderstanding. But Sua ignored their pleas, still advancing and insisting that they stay apart. Her eyes made it clear she wasn't joking and might actually hurt them both. In a panic, Yu tried to appeal to her emotions, saying that she was someone important to him. Stay calm, Sua, you're someone really important to me. That single sentence seemed to work like magic. It stopped her rage in its tracks and brought her back to her usual self. Yu felt relieved, knowing they had narrowly escaped danger. But although her anger faded, Sua's heart remained broken. The idea that the one she loved had betrayed her with the sugar mommy shattered her. Yu wanted to explain that there was no love between him and Han, but Sua didn't want to hear his excuses. Without a word, she turned and walked toward the door. Yu ran after her, trying to explain everything, but she ignored him completely. Han, on the other hand, looked pleased. In her mind, things had turned out perfectly. He turned to her in shock. Though he didn't say a word, his expression clearly showed that hurting Sua was never his intention. Han casually returned to her seat and began talking about her experiences as a guild leader and merchant. To her, it wasn't a peaceful solution, but it was effective. This, after all, was the only reason you had come there, to stop an unwanted marriage. Still, he found himself filled not with joy, but guilt. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the village, the dark presence of the demon sword of chaos began stirring rumors. Villagers couldn't ignore the aura surrounding him, but it was all in their imagination. He was simply walking by, consumed by guilt over what had happened with Sua. These feelings pulled him into memories of the past when he was just a servant, and Sua had shown him genuine kindness and love. He wondered why, after all his efforts, nothing seemed to change. Despite closing the gap in status, her kindness always felt just out of reach. Determined, he resolved to find Sua and tell her the truth. Just then, he overheard a man telling his wife he had seen a white-haired woman running through the mountains toward a cliff. Yu instantly believed it had to be Sua, and the thought she might end her life horrified him. The woman began trembling, and her husband assumed she feared what might happen to the mysterious woman. But her fear stemmed from something else entirely. She had just seen the demon's sword of chaos. Yu revealed himself and asked exactly where they had seen her. Moments later, he reached the cliff described. Gasping for breath, he looked around anxiously. Then, his eyes landed on a figure at the edge of the cliff. Believing it was Sua, he rushed forward and hugged her from behind, shouting that he would marry her if she reconsidered ending her life. To his shock, it was not Sua. It was a 200-year-old grandpa. The old man froze, surprised, then turned red with embarrassment. Misunderstanding the boy's actions, realizing his mistake, Yu quickly released him, turned away, and apologized profusely, explaining the misunderstanding. But the old man wouldn't let it go. As Yu tried to leave, the grandpa shouted, asking if he planned to walk away so irresponsibly. Yu's eyes widened. The man wasn't scolding him for the hug, it was about Sua. He began speaking like someone who knew everything about Yu's relationship with her, as if he'd watched from the beginning. He asked Yu if he even understood what was reflected in that child's and all that yapping. His voice carried weight: anger, sadness, wisdom. He warned you not to underestimate someone like her. Finally, Yu understood. He believed the old man might be a divine messenger offering guidance. Yu turned to thank him, and asked for more advice, but then he realized the old man wasn't even talking to him. He was addressing a nearby tree. Just then, the old man's grandchild rushed over, scolding him for wandering off again. He stood there, speechless. Nothing made sense. Yet the old man's words lingered in his mind. By the time he returned home, the sun had already set. He felt like the entire day had been wasted. Yet the old man's message haunted him. Just as he stepped inside, lost in thought, he was startled to find Sua standing there. She greeted him and welcomed him home, leaving him stunned. He asked when and how she got in, and she calmly explained that she'd found his house long ago, even before their encounter earlier. That day. Yu froze. He felt relief seeing her safe, but then he noticed the tears on her face. She had clearly cried a lot, though she denied it. You could tell. And he pressed her gently. Realizing how much she had been hurt, he explained everything about Han, making it clear it was just a misunderstanding. But Sua had already figured it out. She wasn't hurt because she thought he was cheating. She was hurt because he went to such extremes just to avoid marrying her. That was what truly broke her heart. He stood frozen, speechless. The old man's voice echoed again in his mind, urging honesty. For once, he didn't lie or make excuses. He admitted he truly couldn't marry her. Tears welled up in Sua's eyes. She apologized with a disappointed expression, avoiding his gaze, and said she'd leave. But you stopped her, placing his hands on her shoulders. She looked shocked when he blurted out, "No, that's not it, Sua." She had expected a sweet excuse, but instead, he started shouting that his income was only 200 yen a month. It wasn't even enough to feed himself. Sua blinked, confused. You continued, pointing to his shabby home and admitting he was only able to rent it because of Han's help. Without her, he'd be sleeping on the streets. He clarified that the rumors about him were false. He wasn't a hero or a mighty warrior. He hadn't even fulfilled the promise he once made to himself. Despite that, he didn't want to lose Sua. He begged for another chance like in the past and promised to work harder to become the man she deserved. Without thinking, he pulled her into a tight hug, proving he was serious about their future. Sua froze. It had been over 15 years since their last embrace. Yu's face turned bright red from embarrassment, but he knew this step was necessary. To his surprise, it worked. Sua agreed to wait until he was ready, strong, and wealthy enough to marry her. It should have ended there, but neither wanted to let go just yet. Then, you did something foolish. Acting on impulse, he lowered his hand and touched her inappropriately. Realizing his mistake, he quickly pulled back, deciding it'd be best to wait until they were officially married. But Sua clung to him tightly and suddenly pushed him back. He stumbled, hitting the wall. Before he could react, she moved uncomfortably close. Yu, blushing furiously, tried to stop her, but Sua didn't intend to back off. She moved closer, now face to face, and whispered, "Let's have the wedding ceremony in front of our future kids." From there, the two began messing around like any other couple might. Their playful screams echoed through the air. Meanwhile, a passerby overheard the noise. Not knowing what was really happening, he assumed the Lunar Sword had finally found the demon's sword of chaos, and they were locked in an epic battle. The rumor spread like wildfire, twisted, exaggerated, and reshaped by everyone's version of events. Eventually, word reached a pink-haired girl who seemed overjoyed by the news. She wasn't alone. Another woman by her side asked if she planned to act. The pink-haired girl nodded confidently, declaring that since one of the greatest stars had fallen, it was her time to rise and let the world know her name and the name of her guild. Later on an early quiet morning, Sua slowly woke up after spending a long and wonderful night with the so-called ugly guy. She sat fixing her hair with a satisfied grin on her face, while occasionally glancing toward the door of the house where he was still fast asleep. She felt happier than ever, knowing that her search for her childhood love was finally over, eager for him to wake up so they could practice more wrestling techniques. The thought alone sent a thrill through her entire body, but the peace of that moment was suddenly destroyed when someone appeared out of nowhere, yelling in rage and calling you an ugly bastard rascal. Naturally, Mommy Sua's mood snapped in an instant. The furious man didn't even notice her presence, as he kept yelling, clearly determined not to leave until he had beaten you senseless. Despite knowing that you was the infamous demon's sword of chaos, the man showed no fear and shouted, "I haven't forgotten what day it is." Just then a sword sliced through the air, stopping him mid-sentence. And of course, it was Lady Sua stepping in, unable to stand anyone insulting her boyfriend. She pressed her blade close to the man's neck, her eyes cold and sharp, demanding, "What's so important about today that you haven't forgotten?" The man froze, trembling and lost for words. But before he could speak, Sua answered herself with a smirk. "It's your death anniversary." The words sent a chill down his spine. Still, he managed to stammer out a question. "Who even are you?" Sua leaned in, her voice low, as she whispered that she is the mistress of this house. The man blinked in disbelief, before nervously revealing that he was actually the landlord of the house, the same house Sua had just claimed as her own. That was when reality hit her hard. She had gone too far again, but deep down she knew this was simply who she was, and there was no changing it. Seeing a chance to calm the situation, the man quickly explained, "I'm just here to collect the rent, that's all." As the scene shifted into the house kitchen, their Lady Sua was back to her usual self, cooking up a storm like a professional chef, getting meals ready for the day, while the demon's sword of chaos finally woke up completely unaware of the landlord's visit. The landlord, however, wasn't done. He was furious, not just about the unpaid rent for several months, but also because Yu's so-called wife had just tried to kill him. On top of that, this same man was the innkeeper whose place you and Lady Seal had turned into a disaster zone. Now everything made sense. His anger, his shouting, all of it, but you, ever resourceful and completely broke, tried to take the victim role again, apologizing and claiming it wasn't really his fault. The landlord clearly didn't buy a word of it and made it clear that an apology wasn't enough. His frustration only grew until he spotted a familiar shadow. Watching from the corner, it was Sua, standing still, holding a sharp cleaver, her stare cold and focused like a predator sizing up its prey. The landlord instantly realized it would be wiser to settle things without more trouble. A few uncomfortable moments passed before they all moved outside, sitting across from one another, ready to talk. Sensing an opening, the landlord leaned toward you and whispered while Sua was away, "Who is that crazy woman? And what did she mean by calling herself the mistress of this house?" He was startled at first, but quickly composed himself and explained with confidence that she was the same woman he had told him about before, the one he once served and pledged his future to. The ugly landlord vaguely remembered the tale. He couldn't believe someone so beautiful had chosen to live with someone like you. But what truly shocked him was that he had heard disturbing rumors about them. He was the only one completely clueless about these stories, apparently ever since that magical night between him and Sua, people had begun spreading wild rumors. And as an innkeeper who talked too many, the landlord had heard most of them, though he once dismissed them. Now everything began to make sense, especially one rumor, the tale about how the demon Sword of Chaos used hypnosis to enslave the Lunar Sword, forcing her to obey and do unspeakable things. Hearing this for the first time, he freaked out. He never imagined people would say such things about him, but honestly, if anyone saw how deeply Sua cared for you, they probably couldn't come up with a better explanation. Just then Sua returned, carrying the food she had prepared with so much love. Even in front of the landlord, she didn't hold back and started feeding her future husband with affection like no one else existed. You, caught completely off guard, was impressed by her boldness, while the landlord watched the entire scene with wide eyes, unsure whether to feel jealous, disgusted, or simply confused. The way they acted only made the rumors seem more real. Still, being a kind-hearted man, he chose not to interfere and instead gave a warning that the world now saw them as two shining opposites in a world of martial arts, a pairing that had already drawn much attention. Unlike you, who always panicked at any sign of trouble, so remained calm, gently holding his hand and giving him a reassuring smile, reminding him he had nothing to fear as long as they stood together. Her gaze alone could give any man the strength to face an army, and you was no exception. He lifted his hand and clenched his fist, silently vowing to become a true master. He promised he would buy her a real house, and when that day arrived, nothing would tear them apart. Their eyes met again, and they looked ready to start another round of baby making. Fortunately, the landlord was still there, watching them. Looking absolutely disgusted, he made a circle with his fingers and with a mocking tone said, "You should focus on paying rent and debts before dreaming about his family project." You immediately came up with a clever plan. Hours passed, and the sun began to set. The landlord, who had been irritated earlier, was now visibly excited because you and Lady Sua had gone to visit Sugar Mommy to borrow enough money to clear the debts. You explained everything calmly to Han, and to his surprise, she didn't hesitate to return the favor, something he never expected. They came back quickly. When he saw the pile of gold they brought, it was tempting enough that he offered his run down house in exchange for the gold right there, but you instantly declined, knowing the house wasn't worth that much. And even if it was, they needed to save some of the money for later. Plus, it was Sua's gold, not his, so he couldn't just waste it. Hearing this, Sua smiled softly, grabbed Yu's hand, and laid her head on his chest, gently reminding him the gold belonged to both of them, not just her. Like lovebirds, they began teasing each other, rubbing close, completely ignoring the landlord, who stood there nearly losing his patience from their childish affection. He didn't say a word, and just walked back with them, while they continued their silly play, acting like he wasn't even there. Trying to stay composed, the landlord started talking about the house, asking you to take good care of it, since he might rent it again in the future. You promised with full confidence that he would never let the house suffer even the slightest damage. But before he could finish his sentence, everything changed. A flash of lightning lit up the sky, and suddenly the house they were talking about burst into flames. Villagers quickly gathered to watch in shock, while you and the landlord stood frozen, unable to speak as they watched the home disappear in fires. Slowly, the landlord reached for the gold and took it, believing that you had failed in keeping the house safe. You just stood there, mouth open, eyes wide, too stunned to stop him, and things only spiraled further when from the fire, the pink-haired girl from earlier appeared with a smug grin, announcing proudly that she was the one responsible. The moment her feet touched the ground, she called out to you like they were old friends and introduced herself. "I'm the next head of the For Heaven's cult, the poisonous Phoenix Tang Hai." Yet instead of being intimidating, she looked more like a hyper 13-year-old, flat-chested and bursting with energy, bouncing on her feet as she yelled that she came for one reason only: to assassinate him, leaving both you and the landlord completely speechless at everything that had just happened. The crowd was eager to see what would happen next. Tang Hai stood there boldly, all alone in front of the roaring flames, while the surrounding villagers formed a circle around her, watching closely. After what she clearly believed was an epic entrance, she immediately challenged the demon Sword of Chaos, giving you the chance to strike first. But before she could finish yapping, massive waves of lightning suddenly burst toward her. The deadly strikes weren't aimed directly, but passed so close they tore through what little was left of the burning house. Behind her, caught completely off guard, Tang froze, and for the first time, her confidence visibly cracked. That was when Sua Sua stepped forward, her face calm and determined, her voice cold, as she announced that if Tang wanted to fight, she'd have to face her first before even thinking about going after Sua made it clear she could have ended Tang instantly, but chose to be fair this time. Although she had no plans of holding back, she was ready to crush anyone who dared insult the only reason she lived. And breathed instead of backing down, Tang smirked, regaining her confidence, and said, "What's up?" With a challenging grin, making it obvious she already knew who Sua was. Lady Sua kept walking forward, her body glowing with a white aura and brilliant flashes of light, while ahead of her stood the overly confident, flat-chested girl, whose body blazed with green flame like energy. Tang Hai hadn't expected to run into Sua while hunting down you, or at least pretended she hadn't. And she still believed Sua wouldn't be that hard to defeat. Sua paused, slightly irritated, as Tang rambled like an overexcited child. Deciding enough was enough, Tang suddenly launched her secret move, determined to end the fight with a single blow. But her plan failed instantly. She ended up half buried in the dirt, with only her head and chest sticking out, completely stunned by how fast she had been taken down. While this unfolded, villagers nearby worked together to put out the remaining flames. You didn't seem too bothered about the damage, unlike the landlord, who now demanded Tang pay for the destruction she caused. But Tang, despite her clear defeat, refused to admit anything, and instead tried to flip the story, acting like the demon's sword of chaos had harassed her. In truth, this was just another piece of her plan. As the heir to a powerful noble family, Tang wasn't about to admit defeat so easily. She just needed time to figure something out. Just then, someone dropped from the sky, landing directly in the middle of the mess. It was, of course, Tang's loyal underling, a skilled martial artist. As Tang shouted, "Come forth, my royal and excellent assistant," Sua simply reached out, placed her hand on the woman's head, and calmly used her power to bury her in the dirt, just like Tang. Tang screamed and yelled out every impressive title she could think of for the woman, but within seconds her so-called trump card was defeated and sealed without effort. You watched the entire scene from a distance, stunned at how easily Sua single-handedly destroyed the two so-called powerful girls in such a one-sided battle. Later, once the chaos died down, you questioned both of them, trying to understand what had caused all this mess. Tang, still full of misplaced confidence, claimed she was doing her duty as a hero, trying to save the world from its greatest villain. She explained that since she couldn't find you at his home, she came up with a simple plan: burn the house down. That explanation didn't sit well with the landlord, who was still fuming over his ruined property. What shocked you even more was when Tang started repeating one of the strange rumors had taken Sua's parents hostage and was forcing her to obey his every command. Tang said the statement caught you completely off guard. Nothing about it made sense. Just moments earlier, Tang had tried to kill Sua, and now she claimed she had come to save her. Clearly, she was hiding something, to everyone's surprise. It was Tang's assistant, the one she had proudly called the silent demon, who chose that moment to reveal the truth. The assistant spoke up without hesitation and exposed Tang's real goal. She explained that this whole thing had nothing to do with saving anyone. Tang had simply wanted to use the situation to catch the Lunar Sword off guard. The silent demon explained that it all began a year ago during a martial arts tournament where Tang had been brutally defeated by the Lunar Sword. Unable to accept her loss, Tang had plotted revenge ever since. Tang, now in full panic, tried to stop her assistant, pulling her hair and swinging it into her face as she yelled, "You're my underling, not theirs," desperate to silence her, and continued talking. The assistant glanced toward the aftermath of Sua's earlier attack and admitted that she too once dreamed of challenging the Lunar Sword. She never had the strength to do it until now. You watched in disbelief as the assistant calmly declared she had hoped to kill two birds with one stone: first defeat you, then claim to have rescued Sua and earn the title of hero. After hearing this tangled mess of a story, you and Sua exchanged awkward glances, wondering whether these two women were really allies or just selfish individuals chasing their own glory. Tang, now humiliated to the core, let out a scream, like someone had jabbed her with something sharp. In frustration, she finally confessed to everything, confirming that Sua's power hadn't just embarrassed her, it had shaken her to the core. Sua didn't respond. She had no interest in defending herself. Tang suddenly gave her assistant an order to move to the backup plan before everything spiraled out of control. At first, the talkative demon didn't seem eager to obey, but after a few more commands, she suddenly jumped into action, breaking free from the dirt trap in a single motion. In a flash, she was standing right in front of you, who realized too late that he had let his guard down. Their gazes locked. The silent demon, ready to do her job, and the boy bracing himself to be torn apart. Sua, who had also let her guard down and hadn't seen this coming, quickly tried to step in and protect you, but in the very next moment, her eyes widened in shock. The demon didn't harm you. Instead, she appeared on top of a nearby cliff with someone else standing close to her. Tang's expression shifted, turning into that of a cheerful, overly confident kid. Again, she said casually, "This wasn't really what I wanted to do, but you forced me to use this dirty trick." That's when everything started to come to light. The silent demon suddenly brought out a 100-year-old granny from nowhere and held a knife to her throat. You reacted like he recognized the old woman, like she looked really familiar to him. Seeing this gave Tang her confidence back. She shouted at you to surrender immediately before she used his precious hostage against him to force his hand. Unfortunately for Tang, you didn't actually know who the granny was. He just felt sorry for her. That's when the atmosphere turned heavy and an awkward silence filled the air. Everyone stood there watching him in shock. Tang, however, didn't buy it. She thought the so-called demon sword was just pretending not to know the granny, so he wouldn't lose the upper hand to snap him. You scratched his ugly face awkwardly and looked sad. After a moment of hesitation, he finally said, "My mom, she died when I was only 5." Tang was speechless. Her eyes went wide and her mouth hung open in disbelief, but her shock didn't last long, because everything was confirmed when the granny suddenly started shouting in anger. "My lost son's name is Johan, not you," she went on to remind everyone. Just as everything seemed to calm down and Tang realized she had seriously messed up this time, she decided to create a massive scene. She started shouting and screaming at the top of her lungs, making a fuss about why you didn't care about his mother's safety and why he wouldn't just surrender. She didn't hold back, exaggerating. Few surprisingly, the granny decided to cooperate with Tang and the silent demon. She suddenly began crying out for help, begging as if her life really depended on Yu's actions. Yu, caught off guard, fell right into their trap. He awkwardly wanted to put an end to the madness, but at the same time he didn't want to surrender and throw his life away. That's when Tang's plan started to work. The commotion drew a crowd as people gathered to see what all the noise and chaos were about. Things quickly escalated for Yu as onlookers began judging him harshly, saying things like, "What kind of person wouldn't care if his mother was killed, or would he really cut ties with his own mother just to save himself?" Yu knew deep down that the granny wasn't his mother, but hearing all those ridiculous accusations from the crowd. But Tang's plan turned out to be a double-edged sword. Some of the onlookers shifted their attention to her, questioning her actions and mocking her. They called her a weirdo for just like Yu. Tang found it hard to handle the judgment and ridicule. It was karma for her actions, and she was utterly helpless against it. However, being a 13-year-old flat-chested hyperactive kid, she couldn't stand hearing those insults thrown at her like that, so she decided to act with a bit of effort. She pulled her small half-buried body out of the ground. As soon as Tang got free, she called out to Yu, making both Sua and the boy turn around, only to realize their little troublemaker was on the loose again. This time, Tang wasn't in the mood to waste time messing around or giving some childish speech. Instead, she pulled out 8 poisonous darts from who knows where and declared it was time to settle everything once and for all and make a run for it. Poor Yu was left completely stunned. He barely had a second to catch his breath before things escalated even more. Without any hesitation, Tang threw all 8 darts at once, aiming straight for Yu, and probably Sua too. As expected, Lady Sua effortlessly blocked all the incoming threats like it wasn't something she even needed to worry about. But what Sua didn't realize was that Tang had only been causing a scene to grab her attention, and it worked. The real danger was behind her. The silent demon had quietly aimed much larger darts at them. Lady Sua, despite everything, managed to block the dart at the very last second before it could hit her. But unfortunately, that wasn't the only dart. The silent demon had thrown another one, had been aimed at Yu, and she hadn't noticed it in time to block it. Being completely useless and unskilled, Yu just stood there doing absolutely nothing. He didn't even try to dodge. Instead, he simply accepted the dart with open arms. But the moment it hit him, he quickly realized he should have at least tried to move out of the way. The pain was unbearable. Seeing this, Lady Sua was left stunned. She couldn't believe what she was witnessing. The thought hit her hard. Her future husband might actually die because she underestimated their enemies. The poisonous dart didn't just hit the boy, it went straight through him. Like it was as fast as a bullet, Sua ran toward Yu and caught him in her arms. Even the landlord rushed over, panicking, afraid this might be the boy's final moments. Lady Sua couldn't stop blaming herself for everything. Convinced it was all her fault, her eyes filled with tears of regret, thinking that she could have saved Yu if only she'd noticed the sneaky attack a second earlier. She was sure Yu was done for. And then to her shock, Yu said something strange. He didn't feel any pain at all, like he was totally fine. He just felt a little dizzy. Hearing this, Sua hugged him tightly, overwhelmed with relief that her ugly boyfriend was okay. Yu, feeling better now, hugged her back and apologized for making her worry so much. The landlord, on the other hand, stood there frozen, not because of their emotional embrace, but because he was absolutely certain the dart had pierced Yu's body. That's why he believed he was okay. Tang was listening to their conversation, but decided to crush their hopes by saying those darts were coated with the deadliest venom, one that no one could survive. Standing there in her mismatched pants, she held up a small bottle of venom and called it the 100 fragrant root poison. You believed her, instantly horrified to realize it was the most potent poison from Tang's clan. The flat-stick girl went on to explain that the poison must have already started spreading through Yu's body. She said that soon, when it reached his body's core, he would die in the most excruciating pain. Yu wasn't feeling anything yet, but he was frozen in shock, wondering how such a tiny amount of poison on a single dart could do all of that before killing him. Then Tang revealed the final chilling secret behind the poison. She explained that the reason it was considered the deadliest was because it spread and multiplied using internal energy. He suddenly understood why he wasn't feeling any pain. For someone like him with zero internal energy, the poison was completely useless, like smoking a cigarette and expecting instant death. Tang, however, didn't know that she had assumed that. She was so sure of her assumption that she just stood there waiting to see Yu collapse and die at any moment. But nothing happened. The only thing Yu felt was a slight stinging sensation at the spot where the dart or needle had hit him. On the other hand, the preactive kid couldn't help but wonder if she had miscalculated the timing or something, because by now the poison should have at least. The landlord hurried off to grab some medicine just in case. Meanwhile, Lady Sua started crying again, buying like a little kid, thinking that because of her mistake Yu could actually be dead by now. A little distance away, Tang was staring at her dart or needle or whatever it was, wondering if she had forgotten to poison it. If that wasn't the case, then why wasn't the poison doing anything to the guy glancing at her poison bottle? The flat chest tested, overly eager girl began to wonder if she had accidentally used something else instead of her clan's venom to confirm her suspicion. She decided to test it out. Tang lightly tapped her pointer finger on the tip of the needle. It only took a few seconds for Sua and you to notice something was seriously wrong with the overly eager girl. That tiny amount of poison that entered her body with that tap was enough to send her into extreme agony, exactly the kind of pain she had expected you to feel. But at least now she was sure the poison was working perfectly fine hours or maybe even days later, in an unknown place after being lucky enough to survive. Tang slowly started to regain consciousness. It didn't take long for her to recall the last thing that happened. She immediately sat up on the bed she was resting on and shouted, "Where am I?" You was sitting a little farther away waiting for her. To wake up without much emotion, he casually answered her question with, "You're in the village clinic." The last thing Tang expected to see was the so-called demon Sword of Chaos. Acting like he actually cared about her well-being, the boy didn't miss the chance to tease her and explain with a smirk how he had brought her there. After her spectacular seizure on the ground, then with a creepy grin on his face, you added that they could continue and settle everything that got left unfinished before she passed out if she was up for it. But Tang wasn't in any condition to do anything. Her body was still visibly trembling, the lingering effects of the venom reminding her just how potent her poison really was. She couldn't help but think that you must be someone who had achieved ultimate mastery over internal energy so perfect. Tang turned to you and asked, "Why did you spare my life? Even after she tried to kill you multiple times, according to you actually had been angry enough to let Tang die for hurting her precious boyfriend, but it seemed he had insisted on saving her. You claimed he convinced Sua by saying he had some unfinished business that only the two of them could handle." The flat-chested girl froze for a moment, realizing she was nothing more than a hopeless kid in front of him, thinking if even the Lunar Sword had surrendered to him, then someone like her had no choice but to accept whatever he said. Clenching her fist in frustration, Tang hated the idea of being defenseless and humiliated like this. She had dreamed of becoming a righteous hero, yet here she was ending up as some kind of servant to a devilish guy, still wearing his deadly serious expression. Interrupted her thoughts and cut straight to the point, stating what they needed to do next. But the moment he mentioned her family and clan's name before he could even finish, Tang jumped in and interrupted him. She might have looked like an impulsive kid, but she wasn't about to let her family take the heat for her actions. Firmly, she announced that she would personally take full responsibility for whatever he wanted her to do. That's when you didn't hold back and bluntly stated that she owed him 10,000 gold coins for the burnt down house and some extra for all the trouble she caused him. Without a second thought, she agreed, thinking she could easily gather the gold and pay him off. But here's the catch. There was a huge problem. You wanted the first payment right now. Tang, on the other hand, didn't even have a single gold coin to her name, so you decided to get creative. There, he suggested she could do something instead if she really wanted to pay off the debt faster. And no, it wasn't that kind of dirty thing you might be thinking, you dirty gooner. Instead, they headed to the landlord's guest house where Tang was stuck working as an attendant for him. She'd have to keep at it long enough to clear her debt before she could go. Now, as a noble girl and a martial artist, Tang struggled hard with her new job. For the most part, it was a nightmare. She couldn't stop complaining to you every chance she got. She never imagined the demon sword would drag her into something like this, working to pay off her debt. In her head, she thought you and his wife were planning to do something forbidden or sinister to her body. But nope, it was just her wild imagination running loose. She snapped out of her daydream the moment someone shouted for guests just arrived. They need service on the second floor. Before Tang could even react, Sua, in front of everyone, like they didn't even exist, plopped herself right onto Yu's legs and rested her head on his chest. She seemed a little suspicious that Tang might be up to something shady or planning to hurt him in some way, so even when you told her to get up, she flat out refused. You, on the other hand, calmly explained that he didn't think Tang would try anything. He believed she wasn't going anywhere or doing anything to hurt him. She had already admitted her mistake and was willing to make up. And with Sua being all cute, but from the way he was acting, like barely holding himself back, making it clear for Sua that something was bothering him. For a split second, Sua wondered if maybe her weight was bothering him. She attempted to get up and head back to her seat, but before she could, you wrapped his arm around her waist and stopped her. Even if he was a little embarrassed, he wasn't about to hold back from comforting the love of his life even in public. And just like that, the two of them went right back to acting like lovesick teenagers, rubbing and fondling each other like no one else was in the room. Nobody around could handle watching that scene, but the landlord and Tang were the exceptions. They just stood there wondering how on earth that adorable goddess could be so in love with that ugly no-good rascal. Meanwhile, in a city on the other side of the country, Tang's assistant was making her way through a packed, noisy street, feeling absolutely miserable from the heat. Even though it was spring, the temperature was unbearable for her. That was until she revealed her little secret. She'd been hiding her true identity under a perfectly crafted mask this whole time. But since no one in the city would recognize her anyway, and to help herself cool down, she decided to take it off. As soon as she did, she felt a lot better. She figured she could rest here for a while before the next time she crossed paths with you and Lady Sua, a moment she couldn't wait to experience again. Later that day, Yu found himself training hard in a quiet spot while Sua watched him. Just from repeatedly swinging his sword, Yu was already panting heavily. He felt completely exhausted, but the thought of how lucky he was to survive this time pushed him to work harder because he didn't want to be a burden on anyone anymore. Despite his body looking like that of a well-trained martial artist, he lacked even the basic knowledge of mastering internal energy techniques. As someone with low skills but a big title, he turned to Sua, hoping she might give him some advice. To speed up his progress, to his surprise, Sua quickly averted her gaze. Pretending to look somewhere else, Yu walked closer and asked her directly for advice. As the martial arts master she was, finally Sua stood up, acting like she was ready to show him something. At that moment you couldn't help but reflect on how weak he really was. Bottom tier. When Sua reached him, she sat down and touched his six-pack, pointing out that his physical strength was already well built, so what he needed to focus on was improving his internal energy. Then in a surprising moment,
shit, you already know I'm obsessed with it.
as if she couldn't resist, Sua threw herself into Yu's arms, pressing her soft body against his. Not long after, they returned to the village or town, or whatever it was. And since Tang had already blown up his house, they went back to the only place they had left to stay, the landlord's house. There Sua tried to cheer him up and boost his confidence, reassuring him that he didn't need to worry too much about his inner energy, because she would help him circulate his kai. Thought it would be best to align their vital energy cores first before doing anything else. Without really understanding what that meant, you got excited, thinking he was finally going to gain some internal energy soon. However, as he recalled the locations of each vital energy center in his mind, you started to feel a little uneasy. Looking at Sua's body from the base of her butt to the middle of her chest and up to above her neck, he suddenly realized exactly what she meant by aligning their energy cores. It was strange to see someone as beautiful as Sua all turn out to be such a shameless pervert. As expected, she slammed the door shut, ready to start their one-on-one intense lining. However, that flat-chested, overly enthusiastic brat wasn't about to let Sua do her training properly. Without warning, Tang threw several darts from behind the door, not even knowing exactly where they would land. Then, like a jealous girl, she burst into the room, acting as if she had heard everything and insisting she wanted to join the training. But the issue was, Tang hadn't expected their training to be something only appropriate for fully grown adults. Things got awkward pretty quickly. However, the situation was resolved soon enough. When Sua used her star absorption technique, the result was predictable. Tang ended up beaten up on the floor with a bruised and swollen face. The landlord came rushing up to the second floor of his house, demanding to know what was going on. At first, he was completely shocked by the scene in front of him, but once he figured out what had happened, his shock quickly turned into anger. He stormed toward you and started yelling at him for destroying and trashing his house. Poor you, who hadn't done anything at all, was left taking all the blame. What? Just then a woman arrived at the scene and announced, "From what I just heard, it seems I came to the right place at the right time." Whoever she was, she managed to catch Sua's attention. Amidst the small chaos, naturally it turned out to be Yu's sugar mommy Han, who had come to visit him after hearing about everything that had happened recently. It seemed Tang hadn't met the sugar mommy before, so she didn't recognize her. Yu, on the other hand, knew exactly who she was. Her boyfriend Han, however, didn't pay the landlord any attention. She was there for a different reason, to make a proposal. She mentioned she had a great job lined up. They agreed to it on the spot. Hours later, a carriage was making its way through the middle of nowhere. Completely unaware of the danger lurking ahead, hidden in the shadows, a group of bandits lay in darkness. Moments later, they leapt out from their hiding spots, blocking the carriage and cutting off its path without hesitation and full of confidence. The bald bandit went up to the back of the carriage and demanded the merchants kindly hand over some of their belongings before they lost their lives. But what he didn't expect to find was four intimidating figures waiting for him inside, and he immediately took back everything he had said, nervously wishing them a good and safe trip. However, Sua wasn't about to let him off the hook so easily. Seeing his desperate situation, the thief tried his best to calm them down, awkwardly playing it off like the whole thing was just one big misunderstanding. It didn't matter much, though not only him, but his entire gang ended up getting a well-deserved lesson from Sua. The group of Big Four continued on their journey, guarding a caravan. Their Han as calm and composed as ever, declared that dealing with those worthless bandits was nothing compared to what lay ahead. According to her, their biggest challenge would be facing the notorious Green Forest Bandits. Based on what Han knew, the Green Forest Bandits were on a completely different level from the usual riffraff. They were smarter, more skilled, and operated as a branch of a larger organization connected to a main headquarters. Recently, these bandits had grown wilder, attacking everything that passed through the area. And since Han was carrying something particularly important, she needed their help to ensure it arrived safely. He was kind of glad to finally meet and help his sugar mommy after such a long time. He wasn't dumb enough to turn down the opportunity, especially with that massive payment involved. But there was one thing about this journey that he wasn't happy about. Someone was ruining their little love triangle. He pointed at Tang, that annoying preactive kid, and asked why she had been brought along. Before the merchant leader could respond, Tang herself confidently spoke up, announcing that she was there to help innocent people fight against villains, and of course to get her share of the reward and pay off her debts. Everything clicked for you. At that moment, he realized she hadn't just come along to ruin his moments, but was also there to stir up trouble for some quick cash. Frustrated, he told Tang to head back. It didn't take long for the situation to escalate when the loud sound of whistling broke through the air, catching everyone's attention. It was the signal time to face the Green Forest Bandits. This time, in an attempt to prove herself, Tang stepped forward and boldly told everyone to stay back and watch how she handled everything on her own. But the moment she saw the sheer number of bandits and their appearance, she instantly regretted her decision, realizing she might have acted a little too hastily. Despite being outnumbered, Tang tried to keep her cool and act all high and mighty, pretending like she was the one giving the bandits a chance to walk away before something bad happened to them. Sua, however, appeared out of blue, already sensing why Tang was acting this way, like she was scared and didn't actually plan to do anything. when Sua interrupted, Tang angrily shouted, demanding to know why Sua wouldn't let her finish the job. But when Sua completely ignored her tantrum, Tang decided to do something reckless. Tang pulled out some explosive darts at once and threw them, hoping to show off her skill and strength at first. The bandits looked confused, unsure of what these darts were, as they figured out that the dart were about to blow them up before they could run or find any cover. The darts exploded with a massive bang, creating an impressive scene that left everyone stunned. The explosion not only surprised the bandits and the rest of the group, but even Tang herself. She hadn't expected such a wild explosion because she had never used these kinds of darts in such a number before they could even confirm whether the bandits were alive or not. And Han realized their situation wasn't any better than the bandit. A landslide triggered by the explosion came crashing down from the cliff above the road. You had expected Tang to cause trouble, and that's exactly why he didn't agree with her being there in the first place. But he never imagined she'd end up nearly getting them all killed. The landslide hit fast, catching everyone off guard. Even in that situation, Sua tried to reach you, but the distance between them kept growing with every passing second. They were eventually split into two groups, Sua with Tang and you with his so-called sugar mommy. Soon later, the landslide finally slowed down, but it wasn't clear if any of them had survived the chaos. Meanwhile, deep in the forest, where a hidden cave served as the base for the Green Forest bandits, one of the men questioned their boss. He wondered if sending such a small group for this mission had been a good idea. The boss, however, calmly replied that their purpose wasn't to win, but to test the carnival's security. Fully aware of how serious this mission was, the boss announced that he had already requested reinforcements from the main base. He confidently added that the mission would officially begin once the person he called for arrived. In the middle of his overly self-assured speech, one of his subordinates burst in, looking pale. Their vanguard team had been completely wiped out, for his underling dripping in sweat and fumbling for words, nervously clarified that not only had the caravan and its guards been wiped out, but every last member of their vanguard team had either been buried alive or burned to death. Somewhere far from the battlefield, meanwhile, far from the chaos, Han, soaking wet and barely conscious, looked up at her rescuer, confused and dazed. Standing before her was her ex-boyfriend, who seemed more than ready to rekindle their long-lost baby, making memories. What neither of them realized was that hidden eyes were already watching them from the shadows earlier. Flashes of that early morning came to her in broken pieces. Maybe it was the last thing her mind could hold on to. That morning, Han held a bounty poster of you, thinking that it was finally time to make the so-called demon sword of chaos useful. One of her assistants approached and questioned whether trusting that guy for a mission, but fate decided to prove her wrong. Some guys, especially the kind with sugar mommies like her, sometimes turned out to be the rare exception. You had risked his own life, diving into danger to rescue Han from certain death. Now stepping onto the muddy shore of the lake, you carried his sugar mommy like a princess and silently swore that if he ever got the chance, he'd give Tang a punishment. After dragging her to safety, you gently laid Han's body down on dry ground and wrapped her in his cloak to keep her warm. As he sat next to her, he couldn't help wondering what he'd do if bandits found them. There'd be no one to help them this time. The thought of the word help made him think about Sua. He hoped she was safe, but knowing she was a master of everything gave him some peace. Still, even alone again, he couldn't stop thinking about her, especially since they had promised never to be apart. No matter what, caught in the middle of choosing whether to keep worrying about Sua or figure out how to handle Han, a sudden sound broke through the quiet. Someone was coming. Yu's head jerked toward the sound, and to his shock, they were now surrounded by Green Forest bandits. He looked over at the merchant leader and realized he was the only one left who could protect them both. Yu leapt to his feet, gripped his sword, and shouted like he had no clue who the bandits were, though deep inside he knew this was a do-or-die moment. Despite his panic, the bandits froze. The way they stared at him made it obvious they were starting to recognize you as the world's most feared villain. But instead of fighting the bandits, all surged forward in excitement, not to attack, but to admire him like some kind of idol. Things took a stranger turn when they assumed you had captured the merchant leader himself. In just moments, the so-called demon sword of chaos was stunned. He hadn't expected to have actual fans who looked up to him with such awe. Not wanting to let them down and unsure what else to do, he played along. He gagged Han with a strip of cloth and began carrying her toward the Green Forest base, pretending to be part of their crew. This made the bandits feel honored, like they were a part of something huge. On the way, one of them suddenly shouted that he never expected their boss would summon the legendary demon sword of chaos, and the landslide would probably use secret attacks. Hearing this, you quickly turned to ask if anyone had found survivors from the caravan or knew what happened to the others. Base might know. Seizing the moment, you decided to use his fame to his advantage. He ordered them to gather all the information they could and report back. Agreed. Then one of them, squinting in thought, asked you about a rumor he heard involving the merchant leader. Completely caught off guard, you fumbled for an answer, trying to stay cool, brushing it off as a lie and insisting it wasn't what they thought. To his relief, the bandit seemed to believe him. You had no idea that Han was beginning to stir again, still tied up, still groggy, and still confused. She remembered her assistant's warning about the demon sword of chaos. Her suspicions only deepened when she saw how the bandits admired him for supposedly capturing her and carrying her like a prize. She couldn't help. Han's rage was bubbling just as the lead bandit announced they were almost at the stronghold, and proudly pointed ahead before anyone could react. Han smashed her knee into Yu's face hard, clearly trying to make him regret betraying her, but Yu just rubbed his cheek and, ignoring her tantrum, stared ahead in shock. Is this really a stronghold? He blurted out. It looks more like a military fortress. Realizing they were walking into serious danger, Yu briefly felt hopeless, like there was no way out, but then something shifted in him. He felt this stubborn need to at at least protect his #1 sugar mommy. Just as that thought crossed his mind, he imagined Sua waiting for him again, and that vision gave him the strength to pull himself together and start planning their escape from this total disaster. Noticing him hesitate and tremble slightly, one of the bandits asked what was wrong, but Yu, who had already formed a plan, suddenly shouted that he needed to practice breath control. The bandits, who clearly wouldn't dare question him, didn't just accept his excuse, they admired him even more, assuming he was preparing for some ultimate technique. However, they still requested permission to guard him. With a sharp, intimidating glance, he shut that idea down, declaring he couldn't guarantee the safety of weaklings like them if they stayed nearby. Then, to their surprise, he veered off down a different path, refusing to leave the merchant leader behind even while claiming he needed to train. When the bandits asked why he was bringing Han along, he casually acted like he needed her for some kind of intense exercise before beginning his real practice. Han, hearing and seeing all this, was shocked and horrified by what you had just implied, but deep down something about the whole situation felt off. Minutes later, a woman's scream cut through the air. As expected, it was Han, not from pain, but pure frustration. As he removed the tattered cloth from her mouth, she had a chance to yell at him. She still believed you had betrayed her, and now even the situation seemed to be playing tricks. Furious, Han insulted him, yelling, but when she caught a glimpse of Yu's cold, intimidating expression, she reluctantly chose to cooperate for now. To her complete disbelief, Yu suddenly untied her, placed his hands firmly on her shoulders, and thanked her deeply. He truly believed the merchant leader had been pretending all along to support his story and convince the bandits. Han, on the other hand, she had no clue what had gotten into Yu or why he was thanking her like she'd done him some favor. After a few seconds trying to process the strange scene, it finally clicked for her, realizing what Yu was thinking. The sugar mommy decided to play along, switching gears to pretend she cooperated from the start, acting like this was all part of her plan to win the bandits' trust. Once the tension eased and the immediate crisis was averted, Han crossed her arms and glared at Yu. Instead of wasting time with all this acting and pretending, why didn't you just deal with those weak bandits with your martial arts? Being awkward but clever, Yu immediately crafted an excuse, saying he couldn't risk putting the life of someone as important as her in danger by fighting recklessly. It was an excuse that, to his relief, partly convinced his sugar mommy. After hearing Yu's answer, Han suggested they use this chance to head down the mountain and escape. Yu, however, grew awkward again, mumbling that he could only accompany her halfway because he needed to go somewhere else. That was enough for Han to lose her temper again. She stormed at him, demanding how his massive ego could even consider leaving his defenseless sugar mommy. Someone in the distance suddenly shouted, whose their panic struck as both Han and Yu dropped to the ground, covering their mouths to stay silent. Moments later, a bandit appeared at the edge of a cliff above them, swearing he'd heard a woman's voice from this direction. Luckily, the bandit was blind. Completely unaware, the bandit started talking to someone else, sharing some unexpected news to Han and Yu's shock. The bandit revealed that the others had captured the Lunar Sword, who had been part of the escorting team. According to him, and much to Yu's dismay, they hadn't captured Sua until reinforcements arrived. Bandits left without another word. From his reaction, Han quickly understood why this ungrateful boy wanted to leave her stranded in the forest to convince him to give up on saving Sua. She reminded him that if the Lunar Sword couldn't win, then he stood no chance against that reinforcement, who she was sure had to be someone extraordinary. Before Han could finish, Yu cut her off, refusing to back down or turn around. To her surprise, Yu declared that in the situation, neither skill nor numbers nor anything else would stop him from rescuing Sua. He promised himself no matter what, he wouldn't lose Sua again or give her cause for disappointment. Suddenly, Han felt a wave of jealousy. She blurted out, so rescuing Sua is more important than keeping your sugar mommy safe for you? But as if she already knew the answer, she let out a dramatic sigh like it came from the very bottom of her butt. She acted like she had no choice but to accept it. Ever an idea began forming in her mind, one that might just change Yu's decision. To her surprise, she began taking off her clothes, one piece at a time, right in front of him, starting with her fancy girdle. He didn't expect Han to pull such a bold and frankly ridiculous move to convince him to pick her side. Things seemed to be going smoothly for that cunning woman when she cheekily told him not to keep her waiting too long and to take off his own clothes as well. You, already flustered but trying to stay responsible, pointed out they didn't have time for that kind of magical work right now. But as usual, things didn't go as planned. Han went ahead, tearing off her clothes completely, then grabbed some of Yu's clothes to wear instead. It turned out she had no sexual intentions. She just wanted to change their appearance and disguise themselves as bandits using her fancy dress. After realizing how important Sua was to her boy, she made up her mind to help Yu rescue the one who mattered most to him. Yu, now standing awkward and half naked, couldn't help but feel embarrassed. He asked why he had to be the one running around without clothes. Han, clearly amused, an obviously best solution. Later that evening, two lowly bandits guarded the path leading to the stronghold when they noticed someone approaching. As it turned out, it was Yu and Han coming to rescue Sua. The moment Yu realized the guards spotted them, he started acting all friendly, like they'd known each other for ages. But the bandits weren't that stupid and quickly figured out Han and that scruffy guy were just pretending to be part of the Green Forest bandits. When their little act failed, Yu panicked, thinking they should retreat for now, but the merchant leader Han had a backup plan he didn't know about. She let the bandits get closer, then out of nowhere slapped one of them so hard it frightened the other. The guy dropped stunned, demanding to know what that was for. That's when Han calmly reminded him their boss had requested reinforcements from the main base. The poor bandit, still shocked, assumed Han was the reinforcement his boss had sent, but the clever woman didn't stop there. She went on confidently declaring she was the wife of the reinforcement leader and had come all this way after her husband. She even introduced you as her direct underling. The way she carried herself so full of confidence, combined with how smoothly she explained the situation, completely sold the story to the guards. They bought it, even dropping to their knees, begging forgiveness, acting like she wanted to show mercy. Han just told the bandits to lead the way and stop talking. Of course, the way she handled everything left you completely impressed, and that was exactly what she wanted. To take another step toward winning Yu's heart again. As they got closer to the main building, they couldn't help but stare in awe. But their shock wasn't because the building was grand or impressive. It was because of the massive wreckage on top of it. They couldn't figure out what caused such destruction, except maybe an earthquake or lightning strike. Sensing their curiosity, the uneasy bandits finally spoke up, mentioning a few days ago a sudden blue laser-like lightning bolt struck the main building and even destroyed part of the mountain. You immediately knew what caused all that damage. It was Sua's preemptive strike. But his reaction gave him away. Han, being sharp as always, noticed there was something he wasn't telling her. Instead of coming clean or even sharing part of the truth, you suddenly said he felt like he needed to start acting more responsibly and being her protector from now on. Han, thinking you was sincere, started blushing, feeling a little embarrassed, but also hopeful, believing maybe, just maybe, things were finally going to get better between them. Again, they finally arrived at the place they'd been searching for, the Stronghold's prison. As soon as they figured out where they were, Yu made a sudden attempt to knock out the bandits silently with what he thought was a professional move, but as expected from a third-rate warrior, he completely botched. The bandit just turned to him in surprise, confused by the weak attempt. Before the bandit could react further, Han stepped in, not wasting a second. She grabbed a stick and took care of the situation. They grabbed the prison keys and bolted, running as fast as they could to find Sua and free her before anyone noticed what had happened. A short while later, they followed the path deeper into the prison and reached a cell at the far end. With a low, cautious voice, he started calling out for Sua, hoping she was there. But what he didn't realize was that it wasn't Sua's cell at all. Instead, it was the cell of the one person still thinking it was Sua inside. Tang suddenly jumped forward. The dim light revealed her not so pleasant face as she cried out in surprise, announcing how shocked she was that they had come to rescue her. The moment Yu and Han realized it wasn't Sua but Tang, they froze for a brief second. They considered just leaving her behind and continuing their search for Sua, but against their better judgment, they decided to take her with them anyway. They quickly opened the cell door and untied the kid, immediately asking if she knew anything about where Sua might be. Tang, however, responded that ever since the landslide, she hadn't had a chance to see Sua, and even doubted if she was still alive. Han instantly felt disappointed, or at least pretended to feel that way, wondering if there was something about the entire situation that made it seem as though the Green Forest bandits had known exactly what they were doing and had meticulously planned the ambush on her caravan from the very beginning. But now wasn't the time to dwell on those thoughts. She urged the others to move quickly before the patrol arrived and discovered them. That's when the flat-stick girl, Tang, explained that when they locked her up, the bandits had mentioned that if the prison door was ever opened, the entire Stronghold's emergency bell would ring. Both Yu and Han froze, stunned. Before they could even react, they realized it was already too late. They were completely surrounded by dozens of bandits who had blocked their path and cornered them. At that moment, the boss of the Green Forest bandits stepped forward, grinning smugly, clearly pleased that his plan had worked. He admitted that he had set up this trap, knowing full well that they would come to rescue their comrades. He, as usual, completely lost hope, convinced they were about to be killed at any moment. Han was feeling just as hopeless, but she still turned to Tang and asked her to hand over one of her explosive darts or bombs so they could blow everyone up together. Unfortunately, Tang had lost her coat, the one specifically designed to carry her weapons. This led to Han and Tang breaking into an argument, blaming each other for the mess they were in and how they'd all ended up in such a dire situation. Meanwhile, you just stood there frozen in place, completely overwhelmed and hopelessly trying to think of a way to escape the chaos. But it wasn't his silence that stopped the girls' bickering. What really stopped Han and Tang was the sudden shift in the bandits' expressions, pure horror spreading across their faces. That's when the bandits recognized you. To their shock, they realized this guy was none other than the most infamous villain in history, the demon sword of chaos. Unaware of how weak and unimpressive you actually was, the bandits saw him as a terrifying monster. Their fear was so palpable that it brought an unexpected sense of relief to Han and Tang. Their expressions shifted, and they suddenly remembered that they had what they thought was a strong person on their side. But while the girls felt reassured, you didn't feel the same at all. Instead, he felt like he was in even bigger trouble now, with everyone suddenly relying on him to save the day. The pressure only made everything harder for him to handle. The boss of the bandits also recognized you, confused and wondering why he of all people was the one who had come to rescue the prisoners. Sensing an opportunity, Tang quickly took advantage of the situation. She warned the bandits that if they wanted to survive, they should start begging. Being the only one who actually knew the truth, tried to play along and confirm what Tang was saying, but his voice was so shaky and unconvincing that it only made things worse. Then one of them nervously approached their boss and suggested retreating before it was too late. That's when it hit you, maybe just this once. His infamous title was actually working in his favor. But before anyone could act, a massive figure emerged from the shadows and a booming voice shouted for everyone to stop this. This man turned out to be none other than one of the Green Forest 8 evil elites, Baldy, dressed in primitive-looking clothes. That made him look like a caveman. He fearlessly approached the so-called demon sword of chaos, showing no hesitation or fear like the others. Han and Tang were stunned. They had thought things were finally turning in their favor, but now with the arrival of Baldy, they realized this wasn't going to be as easy as they had hoped. Han couldn't help but stare at the man's sheer size and intimidating physique. His presence made her wonder if this was the reinforcement the bandits had been counting on all along. Before she could come up with an answer, Wick suddenly turned to Yu and asked why he was even there and what he wanted. The terrified boy was so clueless he didn't even know how to respond, but no one seemed to notice his confusion. Out of nowhere, the giant guy decided to take the peaceful route first, suggesting that you join forces with them instead of protecting those flat-chested girls. He even offered you a big cut of the ransom they'd earned from this mission. For a moment you hesitated, like he was seriously considering switching sides. Seeing his reaction, Han realized the worst was about to happen if she didn't act fast. She quickly reminded him about their contract and the bond they shared. With a smirk, Baldy told Han to stay quiet and let you make his own decision, pointing out she wasn't in a position to interfere. That's the merchant leader figured it out. If they were offering that much money, you like so many others might betray them and switch sides. The ugly bald caveman looking guy extended his hand for a handshake to seal the deal, and Han, feeling crushed, closed her eyes. She knew she might have to accept this harsh reality. To everyone's shock, he firmly rejected the handshake and the offer. He started shouting from the depths of his heart, saying he wasn't like them, someone who chases money and uses brute strength to take whatever he wants. With the picture of Sua's childhood flashing in his mind, he finally answered the question Baldy had asked earlier about why he was there. He said he was there to make sure he'd never lose the person most precious to him again. As expected, his bravery and those heartfelt words made his sugar mommy visibly blush. Clearly impressed, she looked at him like she just realized he was the very person she wanted to share her bed with again. Just then, someone entered the scene, not through a normal entrance, but by smashing through the prison wall. That person was, of course, none other than Sua. Completely enraged and furious, she looked ready to annihilate not just Baldy, but every single one of those bandits for daring to just facing her beloved boyfriend. You, Baldy, and everyone else froze mid-sentence, stunned as Sua made her entrance like John Cena. In that cool spring evening, under the gentle moonlight, everyone in the prison courtyard was completely stunned after Sua's dramatic entrance. Two things were painfully obvious to everyone there. First, Sua was breathtakingly beautiful, unlike anyone they'd ever seen before. Second, she had this commanding presence and intense, almost intimidating aura that seemed impossible for someone so gorgeous to have. The moment Sua spotted her fiancé, she rushed straight into his arms and hugged him tightly. Like a pair of lovebirds, they immediately started fussing over each other, asking if the other was okay. Sua couldn't hide her excitement at seeing him safe and sound, while he kept asking where she had been all this time. Apologetically, Sua explained that she'd searched every hut and watchtower in the area looking for him, but hadn't managed to find him until now. While the two of them were completely caught up in their own world, practically ignoring everyone else, Tang started to get annoyed. She yelled at them, unable to hide her irritation at their behavior. Naturally, Sua wasn't impressed with Tang's attitude and shot her a sharp glare in response. Tang, however, wasn't really paying attention to what was happening around her and just kept rambling on with her eyes closed. That's when Han realized something bad was about to go down. Just a second later, Tang also caught on to what Han had noticed, and she immediately stopped her pointless chatter. True to form, it was Sua who was closing in on her, practically crackling with anger. The air around her seemed to sizzle with electricity, showing just how mad she was. But Sua wasn't furious with Tang just for interrupting her moment with you. No, what really pushed her buttons was the way Tang always seemed to mess things up, putting everyone in danger just to prove herself, like what happened during the landslide. Trying to calm Sua down, Yu gently placed his hands on her shoulders and reminded her that they were still on a mission to escort Han's caravan. Sua paused for a brief moment, but then her temper flared up again. She declared she'd take down anyone who dared threaten her fiancé, and as for Tang, she'd deal with her later. Just then, while Sua was distracted by Tang, a massive axe suddenly swung at her from behind. Even though it came from a blind spot and she seemed distracted, Sua reacted instantly and easily blocked Baldy's sneaky attack. Baldy had been standing there the whole time, watching their argument, and finally decided to jump in after being ignored. It was only then that you realized he'd completely forgotten about the bald guy. Baldy, on the other hand, immediately recognized Sua as the famous Lunar Sword as soon as she showed up. Clearly impressed by her strength and looks, Baldy tried to bargain. He said he'd let you go if Sua agreed to spend some private time with him, playing Minecraft. Sua barely glanced at him, not even bothering to reply. Little did Baldy know, this gorgeous and skilled woman had already promised herself to just one man, and she wasn't about to play Minecraft with anyone else. Baldy didn't get what he wanted, so he charged at Sua, swinging his axe wildly in every direction. Not too far away, the boss, who had been scared stiff talking to you just moments ago, suddenly found his confidence and started mocking him and the others. He joked that even if you, the so-called demon sword of chaos, teamed up with Sua, the famous Lunar Sword, they still wouldn't stand a chance against Baldy. In his mind, Baldy was just on a whole different level. Hearing this made you genuinely worried for Sua. He made up his mind to do whatever he could to help her against that caveman-looking guy. But the next second, reality hit him there really. Wasn't anything he could do to help, even if he wanted to. That feeling only grew stronger as he watched Sua and Baldy fight up close. You realized that if he jumped in, he'd probably just get in Sua's way and give her more trouble protecting him. Turns out, the fight wasn't even close to what the boss thought it would be. Baldy was the only one struggling. Sua was just toying with him. She blocked every one of Baldy's attacks with almost no effort, swinging her sword like it was second nature. Baldy couldn't handle how casually Sua was fighting him. He felt like she was humiliating him in front of everyone. But Sua didn't even bother taking him seriously. Instead, she turned her attention to you and playfully announced that he needed to help her recharge her energy. Whatever she meant by that grown-up comment wasn't the point. The remark pushed Baldy from angry to absolutely furious, making him fight even more recklessly. Baldy decided it was time to pull out his ultimate move. He started by bulking up. His body actually grew larger right before everyone's eyes. Even Tang realized how dangerous things were getting. She tried to warn both Sua and you to watch out. Then, out of nowhere, Baldy leapt high into the air. With all his new strength, he gathered every ounce of power in his arms, clearly planning to end things with Sua once and for all. You did his best to get Sua's attention, urging her to turn around and see the danger coming their way. But Sua was stubbornly focused on you, insisting she needed to recharge with him first before doing anything else. As Baldy began to swing his massive axe, letting out a loud battle cry, you promised her right then and there that he'd help her recharge as much as she wanted. However she wanted, if she'd just turn and face the threat. That was finally enough to snap Sua out of it and make her look at Baldy. But by then, it seemed like it might already be too late. Baldy's axe was coming down, ready to split her in half. However, in that split second, it was like time itself froze. Or maybe Sua just moved faster than anyone could see. In a flash, she swung her sword, and before Baldy even knew what happened, he was sliced cleanly into two uneven pieces. The moment was so intense, Yu Tang and everyone else were left standing, their mouths hanging open in shock. They could barely process what they had just witnessed. Sua's strike was so powerful, it actually carved a brand new hole in the wall of the cave-like prison. That's when you suddenly grabbed Han's hand, pulling her attention away from the chaos. She turned to him right away, curious about what you needed to say. That's when a woman's scream cut through the air, yelling that the hole wasn't big enough for her to get through. It didn't take long before Sua somehow managed to squeeze out of that tiny hole, with you in her arms and Tang clinging desperately to her foot, doing whatever she could not to get left behind. That long day finally ended, and by the next morning, you handed over the instrument that Han had needed them to escort. Han couldn't help but wonder how you managed to find it, especially after what Tang had done to the caravan. You just said that Sua found it and kept it safe. When Han asked where Sua was so she could thank her in person, you explained that Sua and Tang were off dealing with the leftover bandits who survived the landslide, since Baldy and the bandit gang leader had bounties on their heads, and Sua had taken care of them. She could use the reward money to cover the loss of something Tang, as part of the escort team, was supposed to handle anyway. Suddenly, Han's mood shifted, and she asked you if they really couldn't touch anything except for this one thing. She'd hoped that you would treat her like he did in the old days. But with Sua around, she already knew the answer. Han quietly started to walk away, not even waiting for you to say anything. Just as she was about to disappear from view, Han called out to you, making him wonder what she wanted this time. Looking a bit lost, Han said she believed that as the demon sword of chaos, he was actually even stronger than the Lunar Sword, so Baldy never stood a chance against him. He wasn't sure why she suddenly brought this up, but he figured she was misunderstanding him again. And like always, he couldn't really clear things up. That's when Han finally got to her real question. She wanted to know why you hadn't just agreed to hand her over to the bandits and accept Baldy's deal, since it would have been the easiest and best way for him. You just looked confused, then casually explained that he'd made a promise to protect Han no matter what, and he wasn't about to break it, no matter the situation. Hearing that, Han's eyes went wide in surprise before a gentle smile spread across her face. At first, she admitted that it was true you was kind of responsible for the mess they'd all ended up in. Then she turned to him and in a softer, more sincere voice, said she was now certain she'd found someone she could trust with her whole life, no matter what had happened before. A few minutes later, they all continued on together since Han still needed to deliver the item, but somehow, Yuhail ended up chained and handcuffed in prison. And if that wasn't enough, he was sentenced to death under the country's strict laws. It all started the day before, right after they arrived. The deputy official from the province came by to confirm the bounty they brought, in which Han thanked him when he said they'd get paid for catching those troublesome bandits. For the government, a little ways off, you felt pretty awkward being in a town full of government folks. And Sua was trying to help him relax. Just then, someone came up behind them. Having overheard everything they'd said, it was the chief magistrate of the province. He clearly couldn't stand having the demon sword of chaos right in front of him. But there wasn't anything he could do about it. After all, you had helped capture the bounty targets. And just this once, the law was on his side. That's when Han stepped in. She walked up to you, suddenly wrapped her arm around his, pressed it to her chest, and told the chief magistrate not to provoke him, saying he was the one who did most of the job. With that, things calmed down for a while, and they all headed off to grab some food and rest. Even though Tang wanted to get closer to you, it just didn't happen. As usual, Sua took the opportunity. She started feeding you by chewing his food first and putting it right into his mouth. To change the subject and distract herself, Han started explaining why the government had actually decided to let you, the well-known demon Sword of Chaos, go free. She said it was because there's a rule that if a criminal hasn't previously threatened the government and is something helpful, they could be treated like any regular citizen. After she explained this, Han pulled out that special box from seemingly nowhere and mentioned that they'd be delivering it tomorrow for some reason. She asked you Heil to stay away during the delivery. Her reason was simple, but surprising. The recipient of the item was a dragon. You looked totally confused, so Han started to break it down for him, beginning with an explanation about Qi. According to her, when someone's internal energy exceeds what the physical body can handle, it becomes what's called Kai. Back in the day, this was considered the peak of martial arts, and even now, with all the new techniques, it's still the gold standard for true masters. She went on to say that if someone reaches that level of mastery before turning 20, the martial arts world calls them dragons or phoenixes. Everyone else seemed to already know that story except for our clueless friend, you, who looked amazed before Han even finished. Suddenly, Tang jumped in, proudly announcing that she was one of the youngest phoenixes in the world and was known as the Poison Phoenix. As you'd expect, nobody really took her seriously, especially after seeing her so-called skills with the bandits and that whole landslide incident. To get Tang to quiet down, Han announced that the person they'd be meeting tomorrow is known as the Martial Dragon and is considered the future of Manhwa. But instead of calming down, Tang got even louder, saying she'd heard all kinds of stories about this person. Then she tried to describe them for everyone else, but all she could really say was that this person is abnormal even among abnormals. Her reaction was totally lost on you and Sua, who were more focused on taking every chance to get physically close to each other. As usual, Han saw what was going on between you and Sua, got jealous, and decided to end the day there since the sun was already setting. She went over to the innkeeper and asked for a private room for 4 people. But before anything could be settled, Sua suddenly appeared, slammed her hand on the desk, and demanded private rooms for 2 people each. She scared the living daylights out of everyone nearby. To drive her point home, Sua insisted it was for the man's own good that she and you got their own room. Something the innkeeper definitely wasn't going to argue with. Later that night, Tang returned to her room feeling fresh after a good wash and a warm bath. To her surprise, she caught Han trying to eavesdrop on whatever you and Sua were saying in their room. With Tang suddenly showing up, Han got totally flustered. The petite girl, annoyed, warned the merchant woman not to act like a jealous kid. But Han just told her to mind her own business, even though she was already blushing with embarrassment. Since Tang didn't care at all about the tangled relationships going on between those 3, she just flopped on her bed and told her roommate to do the same, or at least keep quiet so she could get some sleep. The real action, though, was happening in the next room over. You was facing the wall, cheeks flushed, after Sua called for him to turn around. She'd just finished a long, relaxing bath and had clearly gotten ready for what she hoped would be an unforgettable night. Sua reminded you that he'd promised to help recharge her energy when the time was right, and that time was now. You obviously remembered. But for some reason, he was acting like he wasn't up for it just yet. He tried to change the subject by commenting on Sua's new clothes, hoping to distract her. But Sua wasn't buying it. She just shrugged and said, "I borrowed it," then moved in so close that you could feel her warm breath. You leaned back against the wall, just staring at Sua for a moment without saying a word. That's when Sua wrapped her arms around him, her emotions clearly getting the better of her. But she still wanted to make sure it wasn't just her pushing things forward. So, she quietly asked you to tell her how he really felt about what was about to happen between them. Before he could answer, she let him go for a second and told him to really look at her before saying anything. To make things even more tempting, she added with a playful grin that since she was all his tonight, he could decide how things would go and what would happen next. The not-so-handsome guy couldn't take it anymore and finally just went for it. He jumped up and hugged Sua back, telling her he'd love to do it any way she wanted. Hearing that made Sua feel even hotter. She smiled, grabbed Yu's hands, locked their fingers together, then pressed her chest against his. Laughing, she said that it didn't matter when or where, she'd always loved that ugly bastard. With that, they moved on to the final part of their mission before playing a full round of Mario. Meanwhile, Han was standing on the other side of the wall, eavesdropping. When she realized what you and Sua were about to do, she couldn't help but feel jealous and a little upset at the same time. Suddenly, she noticed there was a commotion in the room. Han was about to tell Tang to keep it down so she could listen in peace, but when she turned around, she saw something totally unexpected. A weird-looking owl was stealing their valuable item. With Tang completely passed out, The owl clearly trained grabbed the item and started flying out the window. Han just stood there, not quick enough to stop the owl. Only one thought ran through her mind, and it hit right as Sua's Minecraft game was about to get to the best part. Without even bothering to knock, Han barged into the room and yelled for help, as you'd expect. Sua was furious because her recharge session had been interrupted before it had even officially begun. That's when Han suddenly found herself in a life or death situation. But luckily for her, Sua missed her attack and accidentally hit the owl instead just before it could fly off to far. You immediately recognized the special box and knew he had to act fast. Before it hit the ground, without thinking, he sprang into action and managed to catch it. But what he didn't realize was that he had jumped right out the window and had nothing to hold on to. With no one to break his fall, he came crashing down from the second floor faster than anyone could react. Strangely enough, he didn't get hurt at all. And as he sat up, surprised to find himself totally fine, something suddenly scared him. As the dust started to settle, he realized he was actually sitting on someone, and to make things worse, there were guards surrounding him from every direction. That someone turned out to be the chief magistrate, who'd been knocked out cold with you landing right on his head. The guards immediately assumed this was an attack by the infamous demon Sword of Chaos. He was left completely stunned, unable to process how he managed to land himself. And yet another huge misunderstanding, this one even more serious than before. Not far from there, a Shaolin monk was being held somewhere that looked like a prison. He heard all the chaos going on outside and wondered what on earth was happening so late. There was only one reason you wasn't in prison. Before, he wasn't considered a threat to the government, but now that reason was gone. No matter how hard he tried to explain that he hadn't tackled the chief magistrate on purpose, nobody seemed to care. He ended up in chains and handcuffs, forced to spend quite a while behind bars. You even tried to apologize and clear things up, but that didn't work either, especially since the old man was still knocked out because of him. The guard didn't even bother listening to a word you said. He just shoved him into the cell and told him to enjoy his time with the other guy, hinting that he shouldn't expect to get out anytime soon. Only then did you suddenly wonder if there really was anyone else in the cell. In one corner, he spotted the same Baldy from before, and as soon as he saw you, the man asked him to share his life story, saying it sounded like it could be interesting. You glared at him for a few seconds, but then realized there was something strange about this guy. He almost looked like he was glowing. At first, you thought he must be imagining things. People don't just light up like that. But as his eyes adjusted, he could tell the guy actually was glowing a bit, and it made him feel kind of uneasy. Sitting in front of him was the same Shaolin-looking dude, his bald head shining in the moonlight that streamed through the tiny window, almost like a big lamp in the darkness. Just then, the guy introduced himself as Guangdu, a disciple of the Manhwa sect. As soon as you heard Manhwa sect, his surprise grew. So, this guy wasn't actually a Shaolin monk, even if he looked like one. Meanwhile, Guangdu stared at you, deep in thought. He had this nagging feeling he'd seen you's face somewhere before. It only took a few seconds for it to click. He recognized you as the infamous demon Sword of Chaos, probably from those wanted posters that were plastered everywhere while you was stuck in prison. Things were getting even wilder back at the inn. Sua was more dangerous than a ticking time bomb after her mood was ruined, and her fiancé got arrested. Hang kept her distance, trying to calm her down, but it wasn't working at all. Hang tried reasoning with her, saying she understood how Sua felt. But storming government buildings or breaking you out of jail by force was just plain crazy. Sua, practically crackling with anger, shot back that she didn't care if she became the enemy of the whole country. If it meant saving her fiancé, she'd fight anyone even if she had to take them all out herself. Hank tried to warn her that rushing in recklessly would only put you in even more danger. That's when Sua finally paused. Hang's words were starting to sink in, and she noticed that Sua was slowly calming down. Hang gently suggested they should focus on clearing up the misunderstanding first. If they could manage that, everything might turn out okay after all. To motivate Hang to do her absolute best, Sua warned her, "If you get so much as a scratch, I'll wipe them all out, no questions asked." Hang already knew how serious Sua was and promised she'd do everything she could to negotiate and use her influence to save you. But in the meantime, she insisted that Sua and Tang stay put and let her handle things. That's when they realized Tang, their petite, flat-chested friend, was already gone. She was always up for causing trouble. It looked like she was about to do it again. Sure enough, Tang had slipped out, no doubt planning to break you out of jail on her own. Exactly how she was going to pull it off was anyone's guess. If anyone could stir up chaos, it was Tang. Back in the prison, Guangdu with the shiny bald head was genuinely impressed. You had just finished telling him everything, from how it all started to the endless misunderstandings and wild rumors that led to his reputation as the demon Sword of Chaos. Even after revealing the whole truth about his life, he was shocked that Guangdu actually believed him. No questions asked. It was an incredible feeling. For the first time ever, someone believed his side of the story instead of treating him like an enemy. Guangdu just smiled and said coolly that he never judged anyone by rumors or appearances, calling you his brother. Hearing those words, couldn't help but get emotional. He actually teared up, deeply moved to find a true friend in the most unexpected place. For a few moments after that, chatted about the guy with the shiny head. Then he started to wonder what the Baldy had done to end up in the cell. Even though it was a bit embarrassing for Guangdu, began to share his own story. Apparently, when he first arrived in a nearby village, he saw a horse going wild in the marketplace, which, as it turned out, belonged to the village elder. Wang Du admitted that his shiny head actually ended up scaring the horse in the first place. But that wasn't even the real reason he landed in jail. The actual reason? He had punched the village elder in the face after the old man started blaming him and getting in his way. You had no idea how to react to that. All he could do was pretend to sympathize with Guangdu's unfair punishment. Guangdu didn't seem too upset, though. He cheerfully mentioned that it was his last day in jail and he'd be free tomorrow. He even promised to help you clear her name, but said he had to run an errand for his master first. Guangdu explained that he had a mission to pick something up at the inn tomorrow. That's when you began to realize this might be connected to the special item Han was supposed to give to someone. Before he could piece it all together, a sudden explosion shook the area, cutting their conversation short with a thunderous boom and a high-pitched voice yelling for the demon sword of chaos. It was none other than Tang, the ever-energetic troublemaker, who loudly announced, "She come to rescue you." Both of them were shocked when they saw the little girl blow a hole in the prison wall, but he was especially stunned. It was the last thing he expected. Of all people, he never thought Tang would be the one to barge in. His guess was confirmed when Tang cheerfully announced she'd come to break him out, but only if he paid her in gold worth 10 million yen. When you whispered for her to keep her voice down since she was being even louder than the explosion, Tang just shrugged and said she'd already knocked out everyone on her way in, so there was nothing to worry about. Suddenly, the baldy jumped, recognizing Tang the moment she mentioned her stealth technique. Tang recognized Guangdu to his shiny head made him pretty hard to forget, and it was clear they'd crossed paths before. But instead of focusing on the jailbreak, Tang started teasing the baldy, making jokes about how a so-called disciple of the famous Manhwa sect had ended up locked up here. When she finally finished messing around with the Shaolin-looking guy, Guangdu asked her how she even knew you and why she was coming to his rescue. Tang dodged the question, just saying, "He owes me." Tang remembered why she was there in the first place and started working on Yu's handcuffs. As she did, you couldn't help but wonder if it was really okay for him to escape prison like this, even if Tang made it look easy. Guangdu knew this was the worst possible timing for him, but he still told you to get out of there before anyone found out what happened. At the last second, he said goodbye and hoped they'd meet again somewhere else. But just then, everything changed when Tang told you to hurry before Sua showed up and wrecked the place. Just mentioning the name Lunar Sword made Guangdu's mood shift instantly. Suddenly, his whole body was glowing with a red aura. When the shiny-headed guy asked about the Lunar Sword, Tang casually explained that the Lunar Sword was actually the demon sword of chaos's fiancé. As soon as Guangdu heard how close they were always together in public, he couldn't hold back his emotions. He clenched his fist, and that's when you sensed something was off with him. Out of nowhere, Yu's foot slipped and he lost his balance, barely dodging Guangdu's powerful strike. Tang quickly pulled out her poison darts, thinking the baldy had snapped. While Yu wondered what had gotten into him so suddenly, the shiny guy apologized for losing control for a moment and said he didn't have any personal issue with you. But then he grabbed his sword hidden behind the prison wall, right where Yu had dodged and his punch had smashed through, trying to keep things quick. Guangdu announced he'd take care of you not as the feared demon sword of chaos, but as the fiancé of the Lunar Sword. It wasn't clear why he hated Sua, but he was clearly determined to take down Yu just because he was engaged to her. Guangdu's grudge against Sua went way back to when he still had for lonely hairs clinging to his otherwise bald head. That was the first time he met Sua during a tournament. He ended up losing to her, hardly able to put up a fight. Even then, the baldy knew she was on a whole different level, and he really didn't stand a chance. Despite his crushing defeat, Guangdu actually felt pretty good about one thing: he managed to hang on to those for precious hairs. But things took a turn for the worse when Sua grabbed him by those very same hairs and dragged him to the center of the arena, all while asking the referee if she'd officially won yet. At that moment, Guangdu wanted to scream from the bottom of his lungs, admit defeat, and beg Sua to let go of his cherished hair. But after the beating he'd taken, no sound would come out, no matter how hard he tried. Before he could say a single word, he felt one of his hairs being yanked out too. Guangdu, these four strands were so precious that he'd actually given each one a name, as if they were close friends. The first to go was Chong Rong. Then not long after, he lost the second one, Bikyo. All Guangdu could do was cry over the loss of his beloved hair, which, to be honest, felt even more dear to him than some family members. Soon enough, the third strand was gone, leaving him with just one hair left, standing tall and refusing to give in. But in the blink of an eye, that last one disappeared too. Suddenly, Guangdu became the first person on the continent with not a single hair left on his awkwardly shiny head. Tears streamed down his face as he realized how easily he'd lost what he'd worked so hard to protect, especially that last, most treasured hair that had only recently sprouted after that day, when he lost not just the match but also the things he valued most. Guangdu became like the sun itself, so blindingly shiny that no one could bear to look directly at him whenever he stepped outside. That was the whole story, the real reason why Guangdu hated Sua so much. Now, to make things even worse, Sua, the person he despised most, was heading right toward a spot where she was clearly worried that something might have happened to Yu. Meanwhile, not too far away, a door near the prison suddenly exploded open. Yu and Tang came sprinting out with Guangdu hot on their heels, completely losing it, desperate for revenge. He looked like he'd lost his mind, stumbling after them like a brain-dead zombie, determined to take something valuable from Sua to make up for what happened that day. as they ran. You couldn't help but wonder what had gotten into Guangdu. Why did he suddenly seem completely possessed and out of control? Tang pointed out that it all started when she mentioned Sua's name, unlike you. Tang didn't seem scared at all. She insisted they shouldn't just keep running and suggested they face the bald guy head on, not realizing that you was in no shape to stand up to Guangdu. The thing is, Tang saw you as the infamous demon sword of chaos, so she thought he was just testing her. You had no clue what was going through Tang's head, but he was pretty sure she'd gotten the wrong idea again. Without warning, Tang suddenly skidded to a stop, ignoring Yu's attempts to explain himself. She told him to keep going, shouting that she was going to handle the bald guy herself. Since Tang had already scoped out the place earlier while looking for you, she knew exactly where his stuff was and showed him the way to find the belongings the guards had taken. You did what Tang said and headed in the direction she pointed out, thanking her for watching his back. When Guangdu noticed you getting away, he got even angrier and shouted at Tang to get out of his way. But Tang wasn't about to let that happen. In fact, she was actually curious to see what would happen if she, as a phoenix, squared off against Guangdu, the dragon. She was excited for a good long brawl. Meanwhile, you quickly reached the spot Tang had told him about and started searching around for his things. After just a few seconds of looking, his eyes landed on exactly what he was after. He immediately jumped forward and grabbed his stuff, feeling a rush of happiness just to have them back. No one else knew it, but that old sword and even that weird grimy clock were really precious to you. After reclaiming his belongings, you decided to look for Han's item, the one he'd saved. As he searched, he spotted the deputy official of the province hiding in a corner, fiddling nervously with Han's item. The moment their eyes met, both of them jumped in shock and started yelling in fear. You quickly pulled himself together and approached the deputy, asking why he was there and what he was doing with Han's stuff. But before he could get an answer, another explosion suddenly went off behind him, sending him flying through the air for a moment. As expected, the chaos was coming from Tang and Guangdu, who were still locked in an intense battle, completely ignoring everything else around them. Noticing she was starting to get pushed back, Tang decided it was time to pull out one of her best moves to stop Guangdu. Without hesitation, she called out the name of her technique and unleashed a wave of poisonous shockwaves straight at the bald guy. Guangdu didn't flinch. He just stood his ground, letting Tang's attack get close enough before countering with his own unique and equally powerful technique. Their attacks collided and seemed to cancel each other out, disappearing into thin air. That's when Guangdu finally spoke up, suggesting to Tang that they end this pointless fight. He made it clear he didn't care about the brawl at all. He really wanted was to deal with you, Sua's fiancé, and nothing else. Meanwhile, you stood a little ways off, completely clueless about why Guangdu suddenly hated him so much so that he actually wanted to kill him. Hearing this, the bald guy repeated himself, saying he just wanted you gone because he was important to Sua, and that was reason enough for revenge. In a surprising twist, Tang, who was usually the troublemaker, actually tried to talk some sense into Guangdu. She started off by listing all her own bad traits as if they were used to like being arrogant, reckless, and a bit of a troublemaker. But then she admitted he had at least one good attribute, and that was a real sense of loyalty. The whole point of Tang saying all this was to remind Guangdu that just a few minutes ago, they were calling each other brothers. That was exactly why you, despite being known as the most feared villain, was still choosing not to fight him. Suddenly, everything started to click for Guangdu, even though he already knew the truth about you. That little reminder was enough to help him calm down. You, on the other hand, didn't really see the bald guy as his brother or even a friend, to be honest, but he didn't dare say anything to contradict that out loud. The shiny-headed Guangdu started feeling embarrassed as he realized he'd let his emotions get the best of him, taking his anger out on someone who didn't deserve it. Just as he was about to apologize for his rude and, to be honest, wild behavior, another explosion went off, cutting him off mid-sentence. Of course, it was Sua who leapt into Yu's arms again, looking super excited to pick up where their unfinished game had left off. Seeing this, Guangdu froze in place, quietly whispering Sua's name under his breath. Sua noticed someone standing across the way and asked you if he knew who the baldy was. That simple question was all it took to send Guangdu right back into a rage, shifting the mood for everyone and threatening to set off the chaos all over again. After a series of explosions and all the loud commotion at the government building, everyone who lived nearby gathered outside, curious about what was happening. That's when a woman no one recognized showed up, just as interested as the rest of the crowd. Apparently, she was there for the same reason Guangdu had talked about, but she was pretty annoyed that she had to get involved herself. Meanwhile, inside the building, Han had just arrived on the scene. She was both shocked and scared by the chaos going on, knowing she'd probably end up getting blamed for it all later. The first thing she saw was Sua and Guangdu standing face to face, both looking like they were ready to tear each other apart. Out of nowhere, the deputy suddenly appeared and started apologizing to Han. Though she had no clue why he was saying sorry or why Sua seemed ready to fight Baldy, the deputy didn't even get a chance to explain because Guangdu started yelling at Sua, accusing her of taking away everything that mattered to him. Sua, on the other hand, didn't even recognize Guangdu and had no idea what he was talking about. He was just as confused as everyone else about what Sua had supposedly done to Guangdu, but he wasn't about to just stand there and watch. He stepped forward, pushed Sua behind him, acting like a real stand-up guy, declared he'd take full responsibility for whatever Sua had done, even though he didn't have the slightest idea what it was. Just seconds earlier, he'd been running around like a cartoon character, but now his sudden burst of bravery not only caught Baldy off guard, it also left Sua seriously impressed, never expecting him to do that. Trying to act all tough, You started shouting about the past, how the first time he ever picked up a sword, it was because he wanted to protect someone he cared about. Now that he and Sua had promised to get married, he said they had to share everything, whether it was happiness or responsibility. Sua could hardly believe what she was seeing. Watching you stand up for her and risk everything was honestly mind-blowing. You kept going, saying he was sure this whole mess was just a big misunderstanding, and he didn't believe for a second that Sua would hurt anyone without a real reason. Even though Sua was too stunned to say anything and just listened to him trying to defend her, you suddenly announced that if someone had to pay for what Sua supposedly took from Guangdu, it should be him. Guangdu, the baldy, looked a little thrown off by how serious he was about taking the blame for Sua. Right at that moment, Han tried to jump in and remind Guangdu that he was supposed to be talking to them about getting some important item, but Guangdu wasn't interested. It was clear he wanted to deal with this grudge first. He stepped forward and pressed the edge of his sword right against Yu's throat, looking like he was ready to settle things once and for all. Even though Yu was clearly shaking, Sua tried to get him to stop pretending to be so brave for her sake, but he wouldn't back down. That's when Guangdu leaned in and started whispering those ominous words people usually say right before an execution. Sua was terrified. She knew she couldn't do anything to interfere. Guangdu looked dead serious, like he was really about to take Yu's head off. But the truth was, he wasn't nearly as ruthless as he seemed. He suddenly announced he was just going to shave the guy's head as payback for losing his own hair. The moment you heard this, he was completely baffled. He'd been bracing himself to lose his head, and now it turned out all he was getting was a free haircut, something he hadn't had in years. Everyone else jumped in at that point, obviously annoyed that all the chaos, chasing, and drama was just over a haircut. Before Guangdu could say anything else, the same woman from before showed up and landed a solid smack right on his head, calling him ridiculous and asking why he was acting like such an idiot. Baldy dropped to the ground, knocked out cold, while the woman started explaining herself. She said she'd come because the person they'd originally sent to run the errand had ended up in jail before he could even get the job done. So, she was forced to come and take care of it herself. She introduced herself as Chai Yang, the elder of the Manhwa sect, and then deeply apologized for all the trouble their disciple had caused. Tang immediately recognized her and was completely shocked. She hadn't realized that Chai Yang was the same woman who had once secretly worked as her assistant, hiding behind a fake identity. Now, fate had brought them face to face again, other than Tang. The woman also recognized Sua and Yu right away, both by their looks and their well-known reputations. She acted like this was her first time meeting them in person, even though she clearly knew who they were before she could really do anything. Han suddenly jumped in front of Yu and declared that he was her personal bodyguard, so Chai Yang couldn't lay a finger on him. Chai Yang hadn't actually planned to threaten or hurt anyone, but the way Han rushed to protect Yu made her wonder if the rumors she'd heard about him might actually be true. Just mentioning those rumors made Tang tense up, ready for a fight. Everyone knew Yu's reputation for wild behavior, and Tang figured maybe this woman had come to take him down. Chai Yang quickly clarified that all she'd really heard were stories about you being a bit of a womanizer, supposedly attracting all sorts from young, flat-chested girls to merchants, beauties, and fighters. It was anyone's guess what she wanted. But then Chai Yang suddenly pulled back her robe a bit, showing off her impressive curves, and announced she wanted to join their so-called harem because it seemed like they were missing someone like her, trying to make it sound more reasonable. Tang was the first to speak up, telling Chai Yang she should really be ashamed of herself. After all, she was a respected master from the Mount Hasa sect. She shouldn't be acting like a desperate old woman. That jab definitely struck a nerve, and Chai Yang's face clearly showed how ticked off she was. She snapped back, saying she never got to do any of this kind of stuff when she was young because the elders at Mount Hasa tricked her into a position she never wanted. Because of that, she missed her chance at marriage and ended up growing older, without ever having a shot at romance or even being with a man. When Tang asked how old she really was, Chai Yang grinned and claimed she was only 25. Of course, Tang didn't buy it for a second. She looked at least twice that. Tang decided not to argue anymore. But before anyone could say anything else, Chai Yang made another move on Yu, practically begging him to let her join his harem. To sweeten the deal, she pointed out that he already had 3 women, and adding one more with even bigger assets wasn't going to cause him any more trouble. If anything, it might be the opposite. At that moment, the one person who probably shouldn't have moved decided she'd had enough, tired of all the nonsense, started walking forward and told Yu to step aside. You didn't even try to argue. He just stood there, watching her silently as she walked past. The idea of having another talented and gorgeous woman around wasn't the worst thing in the world. But honestly, he couldn't bring himself to say anything with Sua standing. She was ready to do whatever it took to shut it down. Sua's patience had officially run out. As soon as she got close enough, she unleashed a burst of lightning straight at Chai Yang, yelling at her to just get lost already. Of course, Chai Yang wasn't just any ordinary woman. She was a martial arts master, and she wasn't about to go down that easily. The next second, Chai Yang's eyes landed on something that made her freeze. She stood there, staring at the scene in front of her with a mix of jealousy and disbelief. What caught her off guard was Yu. He quickly walked over to Sua and gently tried to calm her down, maybe hoping to convince her to be okay with bringing Chai Yang into their group. But the real shock for Chai Yang was seeing how Sua, who just moments ago looked like a total powerhouse, now clung to you like a little 3-year-old girl in his arms. Suddenly, the deputy official rushed over to Chae-young, practically falling at her feet and begging for forgiveness. The interruption snapped her out of her thoughts about Sua. Chae-young didn't even know who this guy was, but he started babbling about the box that Han was supposed to deliver to them. He said he'd hand it over if they just promised not to hurt him. This only left Chae-young more confused. Without anyone threatening him or even saying a word, the deputy started sobbing and spilled everything. He explained through his tears that the chief magistrate had forced him to steal the box, and he didn't have a choice but to follow orders. As soon as he mentioned the chief magistrate's name, everyone's attention snapped to him. They all stopped what they were doing, curiosity written all over their faces, wanting to hear what else he had to say. Meanwhile, outside the building, the very person they'd just been talking about, the chief magistrate, started shouting. He called you and the girls a bunch of Miriam scoundrels who had taken over the government office, and yelled that they were completely surrounded with no way out. Turns out the whole thing had been a setup, and now they were trapped with no real option except to surrender and face whatever punishment the so-called law had in store for them. After a little while, one of the chief's men came up behind him and let him know that the area around the place was now secure. The old man still wasn't sure if the others were inside, though. He hadn't heard a peep from them since he'd yelled for them to surrender. On top of that, he realized the building was in pretty bad shape and had already taken a lot of damage, so they couldn't just storm in without risking everything. His subordinate brought up their biggest concern, the demon sword of chaos. The chief magistrate got annoyed. He reminded everyone that they were supposed to be the emperor's soldiers and shouldn't be afraid of someone like that. The old man felt pretty confident, especially since he'd just heard that an elder from Manhwa had stepped in and probably already beaten the demon's sword of chaos to a pulp. He also knew the deputy Hyen was stuck in there with the intruders, but instead of wanting to help him, the chief secretly hoped something bad had happened to Hyen so he could use it as leverage against Manhwa and finally get his hands on that special item. When his assistant tried to bring up the rumors about you, the one who supposedly uses some wicked spell to charm women, the chief just brushed it off. He refused to believe any of that nonsense. In his opinion, even if part of that rumor was true, his opponent was the Manhwa elder. She wasn't just any woman who could be charmed that easily. As soon as he finished his speech, the whole building in front of him suddenly collapsed, reduced to nothing but rubble right before his eyes. The old man walked over, trying to figure out what could have caused the building to come down like that. That's when he noticed something, or rather, someone standing there. Right on top of the ruins stood the trio. Sua, Yu, and Han were standing tall and completely unharmed, facing the chief, while Chae-young managed to escape, having nearly gotten crushed under the debris. The sight was hard for the crafty old man to believe. All his plans and ideas seemed to have fallen apart in an instant. As usual, it was Sua who had single-handedly saved Yu and Han, and both of them thanked her for rescuing them again. Han was a bit upset though, mostly blaming that big melon woman for putting her life at risk by recklessly fighting Sua. In response, she tried to apologize, but it didn't really help to calm Han down. Even though Chae-young was physically okay, she was covered in dust and dirt, probably only because she had jumped in to protect her disciple, which she managed to pull off. Meanwhile, in the background, the chief was shouting and demanding to know why Chae-young, the Manhwa elder, hadn't taken care of the demon's sword of chaos, the biggest threat to martial arts. To his surprise, Chae-young suddenly turned around and announced that you would soon be her husband, and from now on, no one should even think about laying a finger on him. At that moment, the ugly old man finally realized that the rumors he'd heard and kept denying were actually true. He'd really underestimated Yu's abilities to make things even worse for him. Tang showed up on the other side carrying the deputy. She lifted the deputy's head to show him to the chief, letting him know they'd already learned everything about his twisted plans. Han, looking totally ticked off, demanded to know how that old geezer dared to abuse her trust, and on top of that, he'd even trained a weird owl to steal her item. The chief magistrate slowly started to realize things were going south fast, and that now he was definitely in trouble. He blamed Hyen for the whole mess he was in, but since he still had his authority, he tried to play it cool and denied everything, shouting back at them and reminding everyone that he was the chief of the county. He insisted they had no right to question him, especially after they destroyed the whole government building and forced the deputy into making a false confession. Then out of nowhere, he pinned all the blame for the chaos on Yu and immediately sentenced him to a painful death. The poor guy was left speechless, wondering why he was always the one getting blamed and punished for everything. The chief had no clue how powerless Yu actually was, but that didn't matter to him. He decided to use the situation to his advantage, trying to stir up conflict among them by demanding they hand over the demon's sword to him. And if they did, he promised to let the rest of them go without any punishment. That didn't help his case at all. In fact, it just pushed Sua to step in and try to shut him up herself, only to be held back by Yu, at least for the moment. Instead of Sua, Chae-young decided to handle the sneaky old man herself. She walked up to him and briefly gave him a glimpse of her stunning beauty, the sort of thing every old man secretly wishes he could have. The chief magistrate was no exception. He was clearly impressed, especially by her curves. But at the same time, he was nervous. He knew she was no ordinary woman, Even so, he wouldn't let her get a word in. He started ranting, blaming her for failing to catch the demon's sword of chaos and accusing her of having a hand in the destruction of the government building. Hearing all this nonsense, Chae-young decided to change her approach and just let the old man finish his ridiculous speech. But since he just kept running his mouth with no shame, she'd finally had enough and decided to put an end to it. Using a little bit of force with just her fingers, Chae-young silenced him effortlessly. She told him straight up that she'd be reporting everything he'd done. That included not just his greed for Manhwa's property, but also falsely accusing their disciple, locking him up, and pretending to be a loyal servant of the emperor. To drive her point home, she made it clear that all of this was nothing short of declaring war against the Murim. When she warned him about the consequences of his actions, the old geezer, who now looked totally terrified, finally apologized and decided it was best to just let things go and move on quietly.